Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The blood on my uniform has finally dried, but the stench still clings to the fabric like a dying promise. What I'm about to document violates every protocol in our handbook, but some things need to be recorded, even if they'll never see the light of an evidence room. It started with a routine wellness check at the abandoned Riverside General Hospital on October 13th, 2024. The facility had been shuttered for 8 years following a series of malpractice lawsuits and financial scandals. What remained was a 6-story concrete monument to medical negligence, its windows boarded with plywood that had warped and split from years of Pacific Northwest rain. The call came through dispatch at 11:43 p.m. An elderly woman named Mrs. Catherine Simmons had reported seeing lights moving through the 4th-floor windows of the hospital. She lived directly across the street in one of those narrow Victorian houses that somehow survived urban development. And she claimed she'd been watching the patterns for 3 consecutive nights. "They're not random," she'd told the operator, her voice trembling with the kind of fear that comes from witnessing something that shouldn't exist. "The lights move in a pattern, like someone's making rounds, like nurses doing their night shift checks." My partner that evening was Officer Rebecca Martinez, a veteran with 12 years on the force, and the kind of steady nerves that made rookies feel invincible. We'd worked together for 6 months, long enough for me to trust her judgment completely. When we pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, she killed the engine and we both sat in the patrol car for a moment, taking in the imposing structure. The building was a masterpiece of early 1900s institutional architecture, all red brick and limestone trim, with arched windows that had once welcomed patients seeking healing. Now, those same windows stared back at us like empty eye sockets, their glass long since shattered or removed, leaving only black voids behind the weather-beaten plywood barriers. "You see any lights?" Martinez asked, scanning the upper floors with practiced eyes. I followed her gaze, checking each floor systematically. The first 3 levels were completely dark, exactly what you'd expect from a building that had been without power for nearly a decade. But on the 4th floor, just as Mrs. Simmons had described, there was a faint glow moving behind one of the boarded windows. Not the harsh beam of a flashlight or the flickering flame of a candle, but something softer, more diffused, like the glow of old fluorescent fixtures struggling to maintain their luminescence. "4th floor, center window," I confirmed, pointing. "That's definitely not natural lighting." Martinez nodded and radioed our status to dispatch. "Unit 47 at Riverside General, confirming possible trespassing activity, requesting backup to perimeter while we investigate." The backup request was standard protocol for abandoned building checks, especially in this part of the city where transients often sought shelter in condemned structures. What we didn't expect was for dispatch to come back with information that made both of us exchange worried glances. "Unit 47. Be advised that building has been flagged in our system. Multiple previous wellness checks, all unfounded." Last entry was Unit 23 on September 2nd. Officers reported significant structural hazards and recommended against future interior investigations. Martinez looked at me with raised eyebrows. "Multiple wellness checks?" Mrs. Simmons didn't mention calling this in before. I pulled up the incident reports on our mobile terminal while Martinez gathered our equipment. The record showed 6 different calls over the past 4 months, all reporting lights or movement in the abandoned hospital. 3 different callers, including Mrs. Simmons twice before tonight. Each time, responding officers had found the building secure, but had noted unusual atmospheric disturbances and unexplained electrical phenomena in their reports. The most recent entry, from Officers Walsh and Cooper just 6 weeks earlier, included a note that made my stomach tighten. Structure appears to retain electrical activity despite confirmed power disconnection. Recommend electrical safety evaluation before future entries. That's not possible, I muttered, showing Martinez the screen. Building's been without power since 2016. City records confirm all utilities were disconnected during the condemnation process. Martinez shouldered her duty bag and checked her flashlight beam. Maybe someone's running a generator. Homeless camps, drug operations, copper thieves wouldn't be the first time. But as we approached the main entrance, a heavy set of double doors that had been chained shut with industrial padlocks, I noticed something that contradicted her theory. The area around the building was completely silent. No generator noise, no voices, no sounds of human activity whatsoever. Just the distant hum of traffic from the arterial and the rhythmic dripping of water from a broken downspout. The chains on the main entrance were intact, showing no signs of tampering. The padlocks were old but secure, their surfaces covered with a patina of rust that suggested they hadn't been disturbed in years. Martinez walked the perimeter while I checked the service entrances, but every access point we found was similarly secured. "How the hell is someone getting inside?" Martinez called out as she rounded the corner from the loading dock area. "Every door and window I've checked is sealed tight." I was examining a basement window that had been covered with a sheet of rusted metal when I heard it for the first time, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the distant chiming of elevator bells, the kind of soft, repetitive tone that announces a car arriving at its designated floor. The sound was coming from somewhere deep inside the building, muffled by layers of concrete and steel, but unmistakably mechanical. Martinez heard it too. She stopped walking and tilted her head, listening intently. "Tell me, that's not what I think it is." The chiming came again, followed by what sounded like the pneumatic hiss of elevator doors opening and closing. Then silence, stretching out for nearly a minute before the sequence repeated. "Backup's still 10 minutes out," Martinez said, checking her radio. "We could wait." But even as she said it, we both knew waiting wasn't an option. If someone was trapped inside that building, possibly injured or in distress, we had a duty to investigate immediately. The fact that the sound suggested functioning elevators in a building without power only made the situation more urgent. We found our entry point at a service door on the building's north side. The lock had been cut, probably years ago, and the door hung slightly ajar on its hinges. Fresh scratches in the metal around the lock mechanism suggested recent use, and when Martinez pulled the door open wider, we could smell the musty air that rushed out carrying scents of mold, decay, and something else. Something chemical and sharp that reminded me of hospital disinfectant. "Someone's definitely been inside," Martinez observed, noting the disturbed dust on the threshold. "These footprints look recent." The beam of my flashlight revealed a set of boot prints in the accumulated grime just inside the doorway. Large, probably size 11 or 12, with a distinctive tread pattern that suggested work boots or hiking shoes. The prints led down a narrow corridor that disappeared into darkness beyond our light. We entered together, announcing our presence loudly. "Seattle Police, anyone inside the building, make yourself known." Our voices echoed strangely in the abandoned space, bouncing off bare walls and creating odd harmonics that seemed to linger longer than they should have. The corridor we'd entered appeared to be a service hallway, with pipes and electrical conduits running along the ceiling and walls lined with what had once been maintenance closets and storage rooms. Most of the doors stood open, revealing empty spaces stripped of anything valuable years ago. But the boot prints continued straight ahead, leading us deeper into the building's interior. As we followed them, I noticed that the air was getting warmer, as if we were walking toward an active heating source. "You feel that?" I asked Martinez, pausing to remove my jacket. She nodded, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Temperature's rising. Maybe there is a generator running somewhere." But that theory was challenged when we reached the end of the service corridor and found ourselves facing a set of steel doors marked with faded signage. "Authorized personnel only. Elevator maintenance." The doors were propped open with a concrete block, and beyond them, we could see the bottom of an elevator shaft. The shaft was old, with cables and pulleys that looked like they belonged in a museum of industrial technology. But impossibly, incredibly, the cables were moving. We could hear the electric motors somewhere above us, whirring and clicking as they operated machinery that shouldn't have been able to function. Martinez aimed her flashlight up the shaft, trying to locate the elevator car. "There," she said, pointing to a shadow about 2 floors above us. The cars stopped between the 3rd and 4th floors. As if responding to her observation, the machinery suddenly activated. The cables began moving with renewed purpose, and the elevator car descended slowly toward our position. The mechanical sounds echoed down the shaft with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, accompanied by that familiar chiming we'd heard from outside. "This is impossible," I whispered, but Martinez was already backing away from the shaft opening. "We need to call this in," she said, reaching for her radio. "This building's supposed to be without power. Someone's either hijacked the electrical grid, or there's equipment running that the city doesn't know about." But when she keyed her radio, all we got was static. She tried again, adjusting the frequency, but the interference was so severe that we couldn't even reach dispatch. It was as if something in the building was actively jamming our communications. The elevator car continued its descent, and as it drew closer, we could see that its interior was dimly lit with that same soft, fluorescent glow we'd observed from the street. The light had a greenish tint that reminded me of old hospital lighting, the kind that made everyone look slightly ill. When the car finally reached our level, the doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing an interior that looked like it had been frozen in time. The walls were lined with the same institutional green tile that had once covered the hospital's patient areas, and the floor was covered with that speckled linoleum that showed every scuff and stain. In the corner of the car, someone had mounted a small speaker that was emitting a barely audible sound, something that might have been music if you strained to listen. Martinez and I exchanged glances. Every instinct I'd developed in 5 years of police work was screaming at me to stay out of that elevator, to back away and wait for backup with heavy equipment and electrical engineers. But the boot prints we'd been following led directly to the elevator doors, and I could see fresh scuff marks on the car's threshold that suggested recent use. "Someone's been riding this thing," I said, pointing to the marks. "If there's a person in this building, they might need help." Martinez nodded reluctantly. "But we stick together, and we get out at the first sign of trouble." We stepped into the elevator car, and immediately I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The air inside was thick and oppressive, like breathing through wet cotton. The speaker in the corner was playing what sounded like a lullaby, but the melody was distorted and slowed down until it was almost unrecognizable. The control panel showed buttons for floors 1 through 6, with an additional button marked B for basement. Floor 4 was already illuminated, which matched our observation from outside. When Martinez pressed the button, the doors closed with that same pneumatic hiss, and the car began its ascent. The ride felt like it lasted forever, though it probably only took 30 or 40 seconds. As we rose, I could see glimpses of the building's interior through the gaps in the shaft doors. Each floor looked like it had been abandoned mid-operation, with gurneys still positioned in the hallways and medical equipment covered with dust and debris. When we finally reached the 4th floor, the doors opened to reveal a scene that defied every rational explanation I could conceive. The hallway beyond was fully illuminated with that same greenish fluorescent lighting, and the air conditioning system was humming quietly, maintaining a comfortable temperature throughout the corridor. But more disturbing than the impossible electricity was the state of the floor itself. Unlike the abandoned chaos we'd glimpsed on other levels, the 4th floor looked like it was still in active use. The walls were clean, the floors were polished, and there were even fresh flowers in vases positioned at regular intervals along the hallway. "This can't be real," Martinez breathed, stepping cautiously into the corridor. I followed her, my flashlight now unnecessary in the artificial lighting. The hallway extended in both directions, lined with patient rooms whose doors stood open, revealing interiors that looked like they were ready to receive new patients. Clean beds with fresh linens, functional medical equipment, even water glasses on the bedside tables. But there were no patients, no staff, no signs of human presence anywhere except for those boot prints, which continued down the hallway toward what appeared to be a nursing station. We followed the prints slowly, checking each room as we passed. The medical equipment in each room was not only functional but appeared to be actively monitoring something. Heart rate monitors displayed steady rhythms. IV pumps showed fluid levels and flow rates, and ventilators breathed with mechanical precision. But every bed was empty. "Chen," Martinez called from behind me, her voice tight with tension. "Look at this." I turned to see her standing beside a whiteboard that had been mounted near the nurse's station. The board was covered with patient information written in neat, precise handwriting. Names, room numbers, medications, vital signs, all meticulously recorded as if this were a functioning medical facility. But the dates on the board were from 8 years ago, the week before the hospital had been officially closed. And the handwriting looked fresh, as if it had been updated recently. "Room 412. Sarah Mitchell, post-operative monitoring, stable condition," Martinez read aloud. "Room 414. James Crawford, cardiac observation, responding well to treatment." I walked to room 412 and looked inside. The bed was perfectly made, with the sheets turned down as if waiting for a patient. On the bedside table was a chart with vital signs recorded every hour for the past 3 days. The handwriting was the same as on the whiteboard, and the most recent entry was time-stamped just 2 hours ago. "This is someone's elaborate setup," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Martinez. "Has to be. Someone's maintaining this floor, keeping up the pretense for some reason." But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. The resources required to maintain power, climate control, and medical equipment in a condemned building would be enormous. And why go to such lengths to recreate a hospital environment that no one was supposed to see? Martinez was examining the medication cart near the nurse's station. "These drugs are real," she said, holding up a vial of morphine. "Current expiration dates, proper storage. This represents thousands of dollars worth of controlled substances." That's when we heard the footsteps. Soft, measured steps coming from the far end of the hallway, accompanied by the gentle squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished linoleum. The sound was getting closer, and it was accompanied by a soft humming, the same lullaby melody we'd heard in the elevator but sung in a woman's voice. Martinez drew her sidearm, and I followed suit. We positioned ourselves on either side of the hallway using the nurse's station for cover, and waited for whoever was approaching to come into view. The footsteps stopped just around the corner, maybe 20 feet from our position. The humming continued for a few more seconds, then faded to silence. We waited, listening intently, but heard nothing more. "Seattle Police," Martinez called out. "Show yourself with your hands visible." No response. The silence stretched out until it became oppressive, broken only by the quiet hum of the medical equipment and the barely audible whisper of the air conditioning system. I motioned to Martinez that I would advance while she provided cover. Moving carefully, keeping my weapon ready but pointed down, I approached the corner where the footsteps had stopped. The boot prints we'd been following led around that same corner, and I could see the outline of additional prints on the polished floor. When I rounded the corner, my blood went cold. The hallway extended another 50 feet to a set of double doors marked "Surgery, Authorized Personnel Only." The doors were propped open, and beyond them I could see the green glow of surgical lighting. But standing in the middle of the hallway, maybe 30 feet away from me, was a figure in surgical scrubs. The person was facing away from me, standing perfectly still, head down as if reading something. The scrubs were that institutional green color that matched the lighting, and they looked clean and pressed as if they'd just been put on. "Excuse me," I called out, keeping my voice steady and professional. "I'm Officer Chen with Seattle Police. I need you to turn around slowly and show me your hands." The figure didn't respond immediately. Then, very slowly, it began to turn toward me. As it rotated, I realized that what I was seeing couldn't be right. The movement was too smooth, too mechanical, like a mannequin being rotated on a display stand. When the figure finally faced me, I saw why the movement had seemed so unnatural. There was no face beneath the surgical cap. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin stretched tight over bone structure. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just an oval of flesh that reflected the fluorescent lighting like polished marble. I stumbled backward, my training completely abandoning me in the face of something that violated every law of nature I understood. The figure didn't pursue me, didn't move at all except to tilt its head slightly as if studying my reaction. "Martinez!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. "We need to leave, now!" I heard her footsteps behind me as I retreated to the nurse's station, never taking my eyes off the impossible figure in surgical scrubs. It remained motionless, that smooth oval of flesh tilted in my direction, until I rounded the corner and lost sight of it. "What did you see?" Martinez demanded, but I was already heading for the elevator. "Something that isn't human," I managed, jabbing the elevator call button repeatedly. "We need backup, we need medical personnel, we need someone who can explain what the hell is happening in this place." The elevator arrived immediately, as if it had been waiting for us. We stepped inside, and Martinez pressed the button for the ground floor. But instead of descending, the car began to rise. I pressed "1," Martinez said, pressing the button again. "Why are we going up?" The car continued upward, past the 5th floor, past the 6th, until it reached what should have been the roof level. But when the doors opened, we found ourselves looking at another hospital corridor, identical to the 4th floor except for the patients. This floor was occupied. Every room we could see contained a figure lying motionless in bed, covered with white sheets pulled up to their necks. The same greenish lighting illuminated the space, and the same soft humming filled the air, coming from multiple sources now, as if there were several people singing that distorted lullaby. "This building only has 6 floors," Martinez whispered. "We're on the 7th floor of a 6-story building." I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't have an answer for any of what we were witnessing, but I knew we had to get out, had to find someone who could make sense of this nightmare. I pressed the ground floor button again, and this time the elevator began to descend. But it didn't stop at 6 or 5 or 4. It kept going down, past floors that shouldn't exist, past the basement level, deep into the earth beneath the hospital. When the doors finally opened, we were looking at a corridor that was older than anything we'd seen above. The walls were brick, stained with moisture and age, and the lighting came from bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The air smelled of earth and decay, and somewhere in the distance we could hear water dripping steadily. "This has to be a dream," Martinez said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Buildings don't have floors that shouldn't exist." But the boot prints were still there, leading out of the elevator and down the brick corridor. Someone had been here recently, someone real enough to leave physical traces. And if we were going to find answers, if we were going to understand what was happening to us, we had to follow them. The corridor led to a circular chamber with multiple passages branching off in different directions. The ceiling was higher here, supported by arched stonework that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle, rather than beneath a modern hospital. The boot prints continued down one of the passages, but there were other tracks now, older ones that looked like they'd been made by bare feet. As we followed the passage deeper underground, the temperature began to drop. Our breath started forming small clouds in the beam of our flashlights, and ice crystals were forming on the walls despite the fact that we were well below the frost line. The passage ended at a heavy wooden door bound with iron hardware that looked centuries old. The boot prints stopped at the threshold, and we could see where someone had tried to force the door open recently. Deep scratches in the wood around the lock mechanism, and fresh wood shavings on the stone floor. Martinez tried the handle, and surprisingly the door opened easily. Beyond it was a chamber that defied all logic and explanation. The space was enormous, extending far beyond what the hospital's footprint could contain. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above us, and the walls were lined with what appeared to be medical equipment from different eras. Iron lungs from the 1950s stood next to modern ventilators. Surgical instruments from the early 1900s were displayed alongside current robotic surgery equipment. It was like a museum of medical history, except everything appeared to be functional and maintained. And scattered throughout the chamber, standing at various pieces of equipment, were more figures in surgical scrubs. Dozens of them, all with that same smooth, featureless face, all humming that same distorted lullaby. They moved among the equipment with purpose, checking dials, adjusting settings, maintaining machinery that spanned over a century of medical technology. When they noticed our presence, they didn't react with alarm or aggression. They simply stopped what they were doing and turned toward us, tilting their heads in unison as if we were specimens to be studied. "We're leaving," I said, backing toward the door. "Right now." But when we turned around, the passage behind us had changed. Instead of the brick corridor we'd followed to reach this chamber, there was a modern hospital hallway with polished floors and fluorescent lighting. The boot prints were still there, but now they led in both directions, as if the person we'd been tracking had somehow walked through this space from multiple angles. We had no choice but to follow the hallway, hoping it would lead us back to the elevator or to some other exit. But as we walked, the passages kept changing around us. Brick corridors became tiled hallways, which transformed into wooden passages that looked like they belonged in an old ship's hull. The only constant was the humming, which grew louder as we moved through the impossible architecture beneath the hospital. Sometimes, the sound came from ahead of us, sometimes from behind, and occasionally it seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Eventually, we found ourselves back at the elevator, though I couldn't say how we'd gotten there or how long we'd been walking. The car was waiting with its doors open, and the control panel now showed only one button, a simple up with an arrow pointing toward the surface. We stepped inside, and the elevator began its ascent. This time, it stopped at the ground floor, and when the doors opened, we were back in the service corridor where we'd entered the building hours ago. I checked my watch and was shocked to discover that it was nearly 6 a.m. We'd been inside for over 6 hours, though it had felt like minutes. Martinez was already running toward the exit, and I followed close behind. We burst through the service door into the gray light of dawn, gasping the cool morning air like drowning swimmers breaking the surface of the ocean. Our backup had arrived sometime during the night and left when they couldn't locate us. The area around the building was cordoned off with police tape, and there were multiple official vehicles parked in the vicinity. Detective Sarah Walsh was coordinating with the fire department, and when she saw us emerge from the building, her expression shifted from relief to suspicion. "Where the hell have you two been?" she demanded. "We've been searching for you for 4 hours. Your radios went dead around midnight and we couldn't find any trace of you in the building." I started to explain what we'd experienced, but Martinez caught my arm and shook her head slightly. Looking at Detective Walsh's skeptical expression, I realized how insane our story would sound. Impossible elevators, faceless figures in surgical scrubs, medical equipment operating without power, corridors that changed configuration while you weren't looking. "We got lost in the basement levels," Martinez said carefully. "The building's layout is more complex than we expected, and we lost radio contact due to structural interference. We're both fine, just disoriented from being underground for so long." Walsh accepted the explanation, though I could see doubt in her eyes. She directed us to the paramedic unit for evaluation and told us we'd need to file detailed reports about our experience. But as the paramedics checked our vitals and gave us clean bills of health, I caught Martinez staring back at the hospital building. "4th floor, center window," she said quietly. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach lurch. There, behind the boarded window where Mrs. Simmons had first seen the mysterious lights, a soft green glow was pulsing rhythmically, and silhouetted against that glow, barely visible through the gaps in the plywood, was the unmistakable shape of a figure in surgical scrubs. We filed our reports as requested, sticking to the story about getting lost in the basement. But 3 days later, I heard through department channels that the building had been demolished overnight by order of the city council. No advance notice, no opportunity for historical preservation groups to object. Just a crew that worked through the night to reduce the entire structure to rubble. When I drove by the site the next morning, there was nothing left but a pile of broken concrete and twisted metal. The demolition had been so thorough that even the basement levels we'd explored had been excavated and filled with clean dirt. I never discussed what we'd really experienced with Martinez, and she never brought it up with me. But sometimes, late at night when I'm working the graveyard shift, I hear that soft humming in the background of my radio transmissions. It's faint, barely audible beneath the static, but it's there. The same distorted lullaby, playing on a frequency that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when I'm responding to calls at medical facilities around the city, I catch glimpses of figures in surgical scrubs standing in corridors where they shouldn't be. They're always at the edge of my vision, disappearing when I turn to look directly at them, but I know they're watching. The official record states that Officers Chen and Martinez conducted a routine building check at the abandoned Riverside General Hospital and found no signs of trespassing or illegal activity. The building was subsequently demolished due to structural safety concerns. But I know the truth. Some places retain memories of what happened within their walls, and some memories refuse to die even when the buildings that house them are reduced to rubble. The healing that took place at Riverside General, the lives that were saved and lost within those walls, created something that transcended physical reality. The figures we encountered weren't ghosts in any traditional sense. They were the embodiment of medical care itself, the eternal dedication of healthcare providers who continue their work even after death. Even after the institution they served has been erased from existence. I still carry my badge, still patrol the streets of Seattle, still respond to calls that range from routine to bizarre. But I've learned to recognize the signs of places where reality wears thin, where the past bleeds through into the present in ways that can't be explained or documented. And sometimes, when I'm off duty and the city is quiet, I drive by the empty lot where Riverside General once stood. The soil there is always slightly warm, even in the dead of winter, and if you listen carefully on still nights, you can hear the distant chiming of elevator bells calling patients to floors that no longer exist. The healing continues in ways that the living were never meant to witness. What I'm documenting here happened 6 weeks ago during my patrol of Route 441, the stretch of highway that runs through the abandoned Riverside Industrial Complex. This report will never make it past my sergeant's desk, but someone needs to know what's really happening out there in the dark. I've been working the graveyard shift for 8 years now, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., covering the 40-mile stretch of state highway that cuts through 3 counties of mostly empty farmland and defunct manufacturing facilities. It's quiet work, exactly the way I like it. Most nights, I'd handle maybe 2 or 3 calls. Drunk drivers, domestic disturbances that spill onto the road, the occasional accident involving deer crossing the highway at the wrong time. The Riverside Industrial Complex had been dead for 15 years, ever since the textile company that owned it moved operations overseas. What remained was a sprawling collection of red brick factory buildings, administrative offices, and worker housing that stretched across nearly 200 acres of prime real estate that nobody wanted to buy. The structures were sound enough, but the cleanup costs for environmental contamination made redevelopment financially impossible. Local teenagers used it as a party spot until we increased patrols and started making arrests for trespassing. Urban explorers occasionally tried to document the decay, but most of them were scared off by the security system that had somehow remained active despite the buildings being officially abandoned. Motion sensors, cameras, and alarm systems that seemed to operate independently of any power source or monitoring company. On the night everything changed, I was conducting my standard 2 a.m. sweep through the complex when I noticed something that immediately put me on alert. Light was coming from the windows of Building 7, the old administrative headquarters that housed the executive offices and human resources department. Not the harsh glare of security lighting or the flickering illumination of vandals with flashlights, but steady, warm light that suggested normal business operations. I parked my patrol car at the main gate and radioed my position to dispatch. State 47 at Riverside Complex, investigating possible unauthorized activity in Building 7, requesting backup to perimeter. Dispatch came back within seconds. Copy that, State 47. Nearest unit is State 23, ETA 12 minutes. Use caution. We've had multiple reports of squatter activity in that area over the past month. 12 minutes felt like an hour when you're looking at a building that shouldn't have power, shouldn't have occupants, and definitely shouldn't be conducting what appeared to be normal business operations at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night. But protocol required me to wait for backup before entering any structure where suspects might be present. I used those 12 minutes to conduct a perimeter reconnaissance, checking for vehicles, looking for signs of forced entry, trying to understand how anyone could be operating inside a building that had been without utilities for over a decade. What I found challenged every assumption I'd made about the situation. There were vehicles in the employee parking lot, Not the beat-up cars and motorcycles you'd expect from squatters or vandals, but clean, well-maintained sedans and SUVs that looked like they belonged to office workers. 15 or 20 cars total, all with current registration stickers, all parked in neat rows, as if their owners were inside conducting normal business. The main entrance to Building 7 was unlocked and showed no signs of forced entry. The lobby beyond the glass doors was fully illuminated, and I could see what appeared to be a security desk with someone seated behind it, reading a newspaper and occasionally glancing at a bank of monitors. More disturbing than the presence of people was the condition of the building itself. From the outside, Building 7 looked exactly as it had for the past 15 years. Weathered brick, broken windows covered with plywood, graffiti on the walls, and weeds growing through cracks in the foundation. But through the windows that weren't boarded up, I could see interior spaces that appeared to be in perfect condition. Clean, modern office environments with functioning lighting, furniture, and equipment. Officer Tom Bradley arrived right on schedule, and his expression when he saw the illuminated building matched my own confusion. Bradley had been patrolling this area longer than I had, and he knew the complex as well as anyone on the force. "That building hasn't had power since 2009, he said, checking his notes. "I was here when the utility company disconnected service. Watched them physically remove the electrical meters and seal the connections. We approached the main entrance together, following standard procedures for potentially dangerous situations. The person behind the security desk looked up as we approached, smiled, and waved in the friendly manner of someone greeting expected visitors. He was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, wearing a dark blue uniform with a patch that read, Riverside Security Services. When we entered the lobby, he stood and extended his hand in greeting. "Good evening, officers. I'm Frank Morrison, Night Security Supervisor. I hope there's no problem. All our employees have proper identification and authorization to be here." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "Sir, this building has been abandoned for 15 years. There are no employees, no security services, no authorized activities of any kind." Frank's expression shifted to one of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Riverside Manufacturing has been operating continuously since 1987. We're currently running our third shift, and all operations are proceeding normally." Bradley stepped forward, his voice taking on the firm tone we used for individuals who might be experiencing mental health issues. "Sir, what year do you think it is?" "It's 2009, of course. November 18th, to be precise. We're coming up on the Thanksgiving holiday, and the company's planning a nice dinner for employees who will be working through the weekend." I felt that familiar chill that comes when a routine call starts turning into something more complex and potentially dangerous. November 18th was indeed the current date, but according to Frank Morrison, it was November 18th, 2009. Exactly 15 years in the past. The lobby around us looked like it belonged in 2009. The furniture was period appropriate. The computers on the reception desk were old CRT monitors, and the magazines in the waiting area were dated from that same year. But more unsettling than the dated environment was how genuine everything appeared. This wasn't someone's reconstruction of a 2009 office. This was a 2009 office that had somehow been preserved in perfect condition. "How many people are in the building right now?" Bradley asked. Frank consulted a clipboard on his desk. "Let's see, we've got 18 people on the night shift tonight, 12 on the production floor, 4 in administration, and 2 in maintenance. Everyone's accounted for and following proper safety protocols." I tried a different approach. "Could we see some identification? And maybe speak with your supervisor?" Frank seemed happy to comply. He showed us a security badge with his photograph and the Riverside Manufacturing logo, issued in 2008 and apparently still valid. The plastic was slightly worn, the way real ID badges get after months of daily use, but the information was crisp and clear. My supervisor is Sarah Chen, Director of Night Operations. She's up on the 3rd floor in the executive suite. I can call her down if you'd like to speak with her. Bradley and I exchanged glances. This was getting more complex by the minute, but we needed to understand what we were dealing with before calling for additional backup. If this was some kind of elaborate squatter operation, we needed evidence. If it was something else entirely, we needed to understand the scope before involving other officers. "We'd like to see the production floor first," I said. "You mentioned 12 people working there tonight." Frank nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. They're running the evening shift for our fall clothing line. Very busy season, lots of orders to fill before the holiday rush." He led us through a security door that required a key card to open. The card reader was an older model, the kind that had been standard in the early 2000s, and Frank's card worked smoothly despite the building supposedly being abandoned for over a decade. The production floor was exactly what you'd expect from a functioning textile manufacturing facility. Dozens of industrial sewing machines operated by workers in company uniforms, cutting tables where fabric was being measured and prepared, quality control stations where finished garments were being inspected and packaged. The air was filled with the sounds of machinery, conversation, and the general bustle of active manufacturing. But like everything else we'd encountered, the scene belonged to the wrong time period. The clothing styles being produced were distinctly from 2009. Low-rise jeans, polo shirts with specific color combinations that had been popular that year, women's blouses with the kind of details that had defined late 2009 fashion. Even the workers' uniforms had the Riverside Manufacturing logo in a design that matched marketing materials from that era. "Busy night," one of the supervisors commented as we passed her station. "We've got a big shipment going out tomorrow for the back-to-school season. Corporate's pushing everyone pretty hard to meet the deadlines." I stopped walking. "Back-to-school season?" "It's November." The supervisor looked at me with mild confusion. "Spring semester, officer. Kids go back to school in January, remember? We always get a rush of orders right after the holidays." Bradley caught my arm and steered me away from the supervisor before I could ask more questions. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Something's very wrong here." We found a relatively quiet corner near the shipping area where we could speak without being overheard. The workers continued their activities around us, completely focused on their tasks and apparently unaware that anything unusual was happening. "These people think it's 2009, Bradley said. "Not just the year, but they're living it. They know about events that happened in 2009, they're producing clothing that was popular in 2009, they're operating on the calendar and schedule of 2009. I was watching the workers more closely now, and I noticed something that made my skin crawl. They all looked exactly the right age for 2009. If someone had been working here when the plant closed in that year, they should now be 15 years older. But these people looked like they'd been frozen in time, preserved at exactly the age they would have been a decade and a half ago. "Check this out," I said, pointing to a bulletin board near the shipping office. It was covered with company announcements, safety notices, and employee information that was all dated from late 2009. But the paper looked fresh, the ink was crisp, and there were no signs of age or weathering that you'd expect from documents that were supposedly 15 years old. One notice in particular caught my attention. Holiday schedule. The plant will be closed December 24th and 25th for Christmas holiday. Normal operations will resume December 28th. All employees are encouraged to attend the annual Christmas party on December 23rd in the main cafeteria. "Christmas party?" I muttered. They're planning a Christmas party for 2009. Bradley was examining the employee time clock near the bulletin board. It was an old digital model that displayed the current date and time, and according to its LED readout, it was 11:47 p.m. on November 18, 2009. But our radios, our cell phones, and our patrol car's computer all confirmed that it was actually 11:47 p.m. on November 18, 2009, 2024. "We need to call this in," Bradley said. "This is way beyond anything we're equipped to handle." But when he tried his radio, all he got was static. Cell phones showed no signal. Even our emergency locator beacons, which were supposed to work anywhere within 50 miles of the state police communication towers, were completely dead. Frank appeared beside us with that same helpful smile. "Having communication problems? That happens sometimes when you're inside the building. Something about the metal framework interferes with radio signals, but don't worry. We have landline phones if you need to make any calls." He led us to a phone mounted on the wall near the production supervisor's desk. It was an older model, probably installed when the building was first constructed, but it had a dial tone when I picked up the receiver. I dialed dispatch, but instead of reaching our state police communications center, I heard the voice of an operator who sounded like she belonged in a 1950s movie. "Riverside Manufacturing, how may I direct your call?" "This is State Trooper Williams, badge 2847. I need to speak with State Police Dispatch immediately." There was a pause. Then the operator's voice came back with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't show any state police facility in our directory. Would you like me to connect you with the county sheriff's office?" I hung up and tried again, this time dialing the direct number for our dispatch center. But the same operator answered, and this time she was slightly less polite. "Sir, I've already told you that we don't have a connection to any state police facility. If this is some kind of prank call, I'll have to report it to security." The phone went dead, and when I tried to get a dial tone again, there was nothing but silence. Bradley tried his radio one more time, adjusting frequencies and checking the battery, but all we got was empty static across every channel. "We're cut off," he said. "Whatever's happening here, it's isolating us from the outside world." Frank was watching our unsuccessful communication attempts with an expression of mild concern. "Is there some kind of emergency?" "If you need to reach someone urgently, I can have Sarah come down from the executive suite. She might have access to communication systems that aren't affected by the interference." I was about to tell him yes, we definitely needed to speak with Sarah Chen, when something on the production floor caught my attention. One of the workers had moved away from her sewing machine and was standing perfectly still, staring directly at Bradley and me with an expression that was completely different from the busy professionalism I'd observed in everyone else. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of pale complexion that suggested she spent most of her time indoors. But her eyes were wrong. Instead of the focused concentration of someone doing detailed work, they held a desperate intensity that made me think of someone trying to communicate without being able to speak. As I watched, she mouthed a single word: "Help." Then she turned back to her sewing machine and resumed working as if nothing had happened. But the brief exchange had been unmistakable. Someone in this impossible 2009 manufacturing facility was aware that something was wrong, and they were trying to reach out to us. "We need to talk to that worker," I told Bradley quietly. "The one at the third machine from the left." But when we approached her station, she was completely focused on her work, feeding fabric through the sewing machine with mechanical precision. When I tried to get her attention, she looked up with the same polite, vacant expression that everyone else had shown. "Is there something I can help you with, officer?" "You were trying to tell us something a minute ago," I said. "You mouthed the word help." She looked genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't know what you mean. I've been working on this seam for the past hour. Is there a problem with my work?" I studied her face, looking for any sign of the desperate communication I'd witnessed moments earlier. But there was nothing. Just the bland professionalism of someone who had been doing the same job for years and found nothing unusual about it. Bradley pulled me aside. Either she's an incredibly good actor, or something made her forget that interaction the moment it ended. Or, I said, something's controlling what these people can and can't say or do. And occasionally, that control slips just enough for someone to try to reach out. Frank had been listening to our conversation with growing interest. "You seem very concerned about our employees. I can assure you that everyone here is working voluntarily and under excellent conditions. Riverside Manufacturing has always prided itself on worker safety and satisfaction." "How long have you been working here?" Bradley asked him. "Since 1987, Frank replied without hesitation. "Started in maintenance, worked my way up to security supervisor. It's been a wonderful career. The company really takes care of its people." "That would make you, what, over 90 years old?" I calculated quickly. If Frank had been working since 1987 and was old enough to hold a job then, he should be well into his 90s by now. But he looked like he was in his early 70s, healthy and vigorous. Frank laughed. "Oh no, officer, I'm only 68. Started working here when I was 25 right out of the Army." The math didn't work. If Frank was 68 in 2009, he would be 83 in 2024. But he looked exactly the right age for 2009, as if he'd been frozen in time just like everything else in this impossible place. "Frank," I said carefully, "what's the last thing you remember from outside this building? The last time you left work and went home?" He thought for a moment, his expression becoming slightly distant. "Well, I live in the company housing, so I don't really leave the property very often. But I think the last time I went into town was..." He paused, looking confused. "That's strange. I can't really remember the last time I left. But why would I need to? Everything I need is right here." Bradley was taking notes, documenting the impossible details we were uncovering. "Frank, do you have family? Wife? Children? People who might be expecting you to come home?" The confusion in Frank's expression deepened. Yes, I think I do, or I did. But it's been so long since I've seen them, they probably think I'm dead by now." He brightened suddenly. "But that's okay. The company is my family now. We all take care of each other here." I felt a chill of recognition. This was starting to sound less like a workplace, and more like a cult or prison where people were being held against their will, their memories altered or suppressed to keep them compliant. "We'd like to see the employee housing," I said. "The residential areas where workers live." Frank nodded enthusiastically. "Of course. We have wonderful accommodations. Single rooms for new employees, family units for those with spouses and children. Everyone's very comfortable." He led us back through the production area toward another security door. As we walked, I kept watching the workers, looking for more signs of someone trying to communicate. But everyone seemed completely absorbed in their tasks, operating with the kind of mechanical efficiency that suggested they'd been doing the same jobs for years without variation. The residential section was accessed through a corridor that connected the main manufacturing building to what appeared to be a separate complex. As we walked, Frank explained the company's philosophy of providing comprehensive care for its employees. "We believe that when workers don't have to worry about housing, food, transportation, or other outside concerns, they can focus completely on their jobs. It's more efficient for everyone." The residential area was laid out like a small apartment complex, with numbered units arranged along wide hallways. Each unit had a simple door with a small window, and through the windows I could see modest but comfortable living spaces. Single rooms with beds, desks, and small kitchenettes. Family units with multiple rooms and child-sized furniture. But, like everything else in this place, the accommodations felt wrong. They were too perfect, too uniform, too much like a corporate idea of what worker housing should look like, rather than actual homes where real people lived. "How many people live here?" Bradley asked. "About 60 families total," Frank replied. "Some singles, some couples, a few families with children. Everyone who works here has the option to live on site, and most people choose to take advantage of it." As we walked through the residential corridors, I started noticing details that made me increasingly uncomfortable. There were no personal decorations visible through the windows, no family photos, no personal belongings that would indicate individual personalities or preferences. Each unit looked exactly the same, as if they were hotel rooms rather than homes. "Can we speak with some of the residents?" I asked. Frank checked his watch. "Well, it's nearly midnight, so most people are sleeping, but there are usually a few folks in the common area watching television or reading." The common area was a large room, furnished with couches, chairs, and a big screen television that was showing what appeared to be a sitcom from 2009. Several people were seated around the room, some watching the TV, others reading magazines or books that also dated from that era. When we entered, everyone looked up with the same polite, slightly vacant expression I'd seen throughout the facility. They were all dressed in casual clothing that matched 2009 fashion, and they all appeared to be exactly the right age for that time period. "Good evening, everyone," Frank announced. "These are police officers who are visiting our facility tonight. If anyone has any questions or concerns, please feel free to speak with them." I expected at least some of the residents to approach us, to ask why police were there, or to express curiosity about what was happening. But after a few polite nods and smiles, everyone returned to their activities as if we weren't there. Bradley tried engaging directly with a woman who was reading a magazine. "Excuse me, ma'am, how long have you been living here?" She looked up with a pleasant smile. "Oh, about 2 years now. I started working in quality control when I moved here from Akron. It's a wonderful place to live. Very peaceful, very safe." "Do you ever go back to Akron to visit family or friends?" The woman's expression became slightly distant. No, I don't think so. I don't really remember much about Akron anymore. This is my home now." "Do you remember why you left Akron?" She thought for a moment, her brow furrowing with concentration. I think there was some kind of problem. But I can't remember what it was. It doesn't matter now, though. I'm much happier here." I tried a different approach. "What do you do when you're not working? Hobbies, interests, activities outside the facility?" "Outside?" She looked genuinely confused. "Why would I want to go outside? Everything I need is right here. Work, food, housing, entertainment. There's really no reason to leave." Bradley was talking to a man who appeared to be in his 40s, asking similar questions and getting similar responses. No one seemed to have clear memories of their lives before coming to work at Riverside Manufacturing. No one expressed any desire to leave or contact people outside the facility, and no one seemed to find this situation unusual or concerning. "It's like they've been programmed," Bradley said quietly when we moved away from the residence. "They have just enough personality to seem normal, but no real individual thoughts or desires." I was starting to feel a growing sense of urgency. Whatever was happening here, it involved dozens of people who were being held against their will, their memories suppressed, and their personalities altered to keep them compliant. This wasn't just trespassing or even kidnapping. This was something far more sinister. "Frank, we need to see the executive offices," I said. "We need to speak with Sarah Chen immediately." Frank's helpful expression never changed, but I noticed that he glanced toward a security camera mounted in the corner of the common area before responding. "Of course, I'll take you up to the 3rd floor right away." As we left the residential area and headed toward the main building, I caught sight of something that made me grab Bradley's arm. Through a window in one of the family units, I could see a child's bedroom. There was a small bed, toys scattered on the floor, and pictures drawn with crayons taped to the walls. But the child who should have been sleeping in that bed was sitting by the window, staring out at us, with the same desperate expression I'd seen on the factory worker. The child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, pressed her hand against the glass and mouthed the same word, "Help?" Then she moved away from the window, disappearing into the shadows of the room. "Did you see that?" I asked Bradley. "The kid?" "Yeah. Someone in this place is aware of what's happening to them, but they can only communicate when they think no one's watching." Frank was leading us toward an elevator bank in the main building, still maintaining his cheerful tour guide demeanor. But I noticed that he was walking faster now, as if he was eager to get us to the executive offices and away from the residential areas where people might try to communicate with us. The elevator was another period piece, with buttons and indicators that matched the building's 2009 time frame. When Frank pressed the button for the 3rd floor, the car began to rise smoothly, but I could feel something wrong with the movement. It was too quiet, too smooth, like we were traveling through something other than a normal elevator shaft. "How many floors does this building have?" Bradley asked. 7, Frank replied. "Manufacturing on the 1st and 2nd floors, executive offices on the 3rd, storage and maintenance on the 4th and 5th, and executive housing on the 6th and 7th floors." But I remembered the building from our perimeter check. From the outside, it had appeared to be only 4 stories tall. If Frank was telling the truth about 7 floors, then the building was somehow larger inside than its external dimensions should allow. The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor, and the doors opened to reveal a corridor that looked like it belonged in a high-end corporate office. Polished marble floors, expensive wood paneling, and artwork that suggested significant investment in creating an impressive environment for executive operations. Frank led us to a large office at the end of the corridor, where a nameplate on the door read, "Sarah Chen, Director of Night Operations." He knocked twice and waited for a response. "Come in," a woman's voice called from inside. The office was spacious and elegantly furnished, with a large desk, comfortable seating area, and floor-to-ceiling windows that should have offered a view of the surrounding industrial area. But the windows showed something impossible. A daytime view of a bustling city that I didn't recognize, with modern skyscrapers and heavy traffic that suggested peak business hours. Sarah Chen was seated behind her desk, reviewing what appeared to be production reports. She was an Asian woman in her 40s, professionally dressed and carrying herself with the confident manner of someone accustomed to authority. When she looked up to greet us, her expression was intelligent and alert, completely different from the vacant pleasantness I'd seen in other employees. "Officers," she said, standing and extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen. Frank tells me you have some questions about our operations. Please have a seat." Bradley and I settled into the chairs facing her desk, and I noticed immediately that Sarah's demeanor was different from everyone else we'd encountered. She seemed more present, more real, as if she possessed a level of awareness that the other employees lacked. "Ms. Chen," I began, "we're investigating reports of activity in this building, which has been officially abandoned since 2009. Can you explain what your organization is doing here?" Sarah smiled, but it wasn't the vacant pleasantness I'd seen from others. It was the calculating expression of someone who was considering how much truth to reveal. Officers, I think there's been some confusion. Riverside Manufacturing has never been abandoned. We've been operating continuously since 1987, and we have all the proper permits and licenses required for our manufacturing operations. Can we see those permits? Bradley asked. Of course. Sarah opened a file cabinet and pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be official documents. Zoning permits, manufacturing licenses, environmental compliance certificates, all dated from various years but all appearing to be current and valid. But when I examined them more closely, I noticed something disturbing. The dates on the documents ranged from 1987 to 2009, but there was nothing more recent. It was as if the company's official existence had stopped at exactly the point when the real Riverside Manufacturing had closed. These documents are all from 2009 or earlier, I pointed out. Don't you have more recent permits? Sarah's expression became slightly defensive. Our permits are renewed on a standard schedule. I believe our next renewal cycle is coming up in early 2010. Ms. Chen, Bradley said carefully, what year do you think it is? She looked at him with surprise. It's 2009, of course. November 18th, to be specific. Is there some reason you think it might be a different year? I felt that familiar chill again. Like everyone else in this impossible place, Sarah Chen was convinced that she was living in 2009. But unlike the others, she seemed to have full access to her memories and personality. She wasn't a programmed automaton. She was a complete person who had somehow become trapped in the wrong time period. Sarah, I said, using her first name to create a more personal connection, I need you to think carefully about this. What's the last thing you remember happening in the outside world? What's the most recent news event you can recall? She considered the question for a moment. Well, there's been a lot of discussion about the economic situation. The stock market crash, the banking crisis, unemployment rising. President Obama is trying to implement various recovery programs, but it's unclear how effective they'll be. All of that was accurate for 2009, but there was no awareness of anything that had happened in the 15 years since. It was as if her knowledge of the world had been frozen at exactly the point when the real Riverside Manufacturing had closed. Sarah, do you ever leave this building? Do you have a home outside the facility? Her expression became uncertain. I live in the executive housing on the 7th floor. I don't really need to leave. Everything I need for my work is right here. But don't you have family? Friends outside of work? People who would expect to hear from you? She paused, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Confusion, maybe even fear. I think I used to have a family, but it's been so long since I've seen them. They probably think I'm dead. When was the last time you contacted them? The confusion in her expression deepened. I can't remember. Months? Years? Time moves strangely here. Sometimes it feels like I've been working here forever, and sometimes it feels like I just started yesterday. Bradley leaned forward. Sarah, we think you and everyone else in this building are being held against your will. Your memories have been altered, and you're being prevented from leaving. We're here to help you. For a moment, Sarah's carefully controlled professional demeanor cracked completely. I saw a raw terror flash across her face, followed by desperate hope. Please, she whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. You have to get us out of here. We're all trapped. We can't leave. We can't remember our lives before, and time doesn't work the way it should. Some of us have been here for decades, but we haven't aged. Others arrived yesterday but feel like they've been here forever. Who's doing this to you? I asked urgently. Who's in control of this place? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, But before she could speak, her expression suddenly went blank. The intelligence and awareness vanished from her eyes, replaced by the same vacant pleasantness I'd seen in everyone else. "I'm sorry, officers, but I don't understand what you're talking about. Everyone here is working voluntarily. We're very happy with our employment conditions." Frank appeared in the doorway, that helpful smile still fixed on his face. "Is everything all right in here? I thought I heard voices." "Everything's fine," Sarah replied in a monotone voice. "These officers were just asking about our permits and licenses. I've shown them all the relevant documentation." I tried to re-establish the connection I'd briefly made with the real Sarah. "You were telling us about being trapped here, about not being able to remember your family." She looked at me with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, but I think you're mistaken. I love my job here, and I have no desire to leave. Is there anything else I can help you with?" The moment of breakthrough was gone, replaced by the same programmed compliance I'd seen throughout the facility. But for those few seconds, I'd spoken with someone who was fully aware of her situation and desperate for rescue. "We need to search the rest of the building," Bradley said. "There might be others who can break through the conditioning long enough to give us information." Frank nodded agreeably. "Of course. I'd be happy to show you the storage areas, maintenance facilities, anywhere you'd like to see." But as we left Sarah's office, I noticed that the windows in the corridor no longer showed the impossible daytime cityscape. Now they displayed the correct nighttime view of the abandoned industrial area, as if whatever was controlling this place had decided to stop showing us obvious impossibilities. We spent the next hour touring areas of the building that became increasingly surreal. Storage rooms filled with clothing that had been manufactured decades ago but looked brand new. Maintenance areas where equipment operated without any visible power source. Break rooms where fresh coffee was brewing and food was being kept warm despite the building having no utilities. And throughout our tour, I kept catching glimpses of employees trying to communicate with us when they thought no one was watching. A maintenance worker mouthing "trapped" when Frank's back was turned. A woman in the cafeteria pointing urgently toward a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." A man in the shipping department who managed to slip me a note that read, "Basement Level B-7," before his expression went blank again. "There are sub-basements," Bradley said quietly when I showed him the note. "Levels that aren't on any of the building plans." Frank overheard us, and his smile faltered slightly. "Oh, you don't want to go down there. The basement levels are just storage and mechanical equipment. Very boring, and not particularly safe for visitors." "We'd like to see them anyway," I insisted. "It's part of our investigation." For the first time since we'd met him, Frank's helpful demeanor showed cracks. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Those areas are restricted access only. Insurance liability, you understand. This is a police investigation," Bradley said firmly. "We need access to all areas of the building." Frank's expression became almost pleading. "Please, officers, there's really nothing down there that would interest you. Just old machinery and storage rooms. Why don't we go back to the main production floor? I'm sure the workers would be happy to answer any questions you might have." His reluctance to let us access the basement levels was the first real resistance we'd encountered, which made those areas the most important places for us to investigate. But we needed to find a way to get there without Frank's cooperation. "Actually, we should probably call our supervisor and update him on what we found," I said. "Is there somewhere we could speak privately?" Frank brightened again. "Of course. You can use the conference room right down the hall. Very private, very comfortable." He showed us to a small conference room and closed the door behind us. As soon as we were alone, Bradley went to the window to check our escape options. while I examined the room for any way to access the basement levels. "Windows painted shut," Bradley reported. "And we're 3 floors up, so jumping isn't an option." I was studying a building schematic posted on the conference room wall when I noticed something interesting. The emergency exit routes showed stairwells that extended below the ground floor, confirming that there were indeed basement levels that Frank didn't want us to see. "Emergency stairs," I said, pointing to the schematic. "They go down to levels marked B-1 through B-7. That matches the note from the shipping department worker. 7 basement levels in a building that's only supposed to be 4 stories tall total," Bradley mused. "This place is definitely bigger inside than outside." We waited a few minutes to let Frank think we were making phone calls, then opened the conference room door. The corridor was empty, and we could hear the sounds of normal business operations continuing throughout the building. Whatever was controlling this place didn't seem to be concerned about us, now that we were away from the basement levels. The emergency stairwell was located near the elevator bank, and the door was marked with standard exit signage. When I tried the handle, it opened easily, revealing a stairwell that extended both up and down from our current position. We descended quietly, passing the ground floor and continuing down to basement level B1. The door at that level was locked, but through the small window I could see what appeared to be normal building services: boilers, electrical panels, HVAC equipment. B2 was similar, with mechanical equipment and storage areas visible through the door window. B3 showed more storage, but the lighting was dimmer and the spaces looked less well maintained. It was at B4 that things started getting strange. The door window showed a corridor that was much longer than the building's footprint should have allowed, extending far beyond what should have been the building's outer walls. The lighting was different too, cooler and more institutional, like what you'd find in a hospital or laboratory. B5 was even stranger. The corridor beyond the door was lined with rooms that had reinforced windows, like observation areas or holding cells. Through those windows, I could see what appeared to be medical equipment, examination tables, and monitoring devices. "This is starting to look like some kind of research facility," Bradley whispered. B6 was where we found our answers. The door was unlocked, and the corridor beyond was filled with the sounds of activity. Not the industrial noise of manufacturing, but the quieter sounds of scientific work. Computers humming, equipment beeping, voices discussing technical procedures. We moved carefully down the corridor, looking through the windows of various laboratories and research areas. Most of the rooms contained equipment I didn't recognize, devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie rather than a real facility. But in one room, I saw something that made me understand exactly what was happening in this impossible building. A large machine that looked like a combination of computer server and medical scanner, with cables running to a chair that was clearly designed to restrain a human subject. And displayed on monitors around the machine were brain scans, memory maps, and psychological profiles of dozens of different people. "Memory modification," Bradley breathed, reading over my shoulder. "They're using some kind of technology to alter people's memories and personalities." The door to that laboratory was unlocked, and we entered to examine the equipment more closely. The monitors showed detailed readouts of brain activity, memory patterns, and what appeared to be programming protocols for inserting false memories and suppressing real ones. One screen showed a file labeled Sarah Chen, Director, Night Operations. Her photograph was displayed alongside a complete psychological profile, memory map, and modification history. According to the data, her memories had been altered 17 times over the past 15 years, each modification designed to maintain her belief that she was still living in 2009. "Look at this," Bradley said, pointing to another screen. "They have files on everyone in the building, Employees, residents, even visitors who've stayed too long. I checked the visitor files and felt my blood run cold. There were records of police officers, security guards, city inspectors, and others who had investigated the abandoned building over the years. All of them had been subjected to memory modification and integration into the facility's workforce. They're collecting people, I realized. Anyone who discovers this place gets processed and added to their population of workers. That's when I heard the footsteps in the corridor outside. Multiple people walking with purpose, heading directly toward our location. I looked around frantically for another exit, but the laboratory only had one door, and we could hear the footsteps getting closer. "In here," Bradley whispered, pointing to a storage closet near the back of the room. We squeezed into the closet just as the laboratory door opened. Through the crack in the closet door, I could see several people entering the room. Frank, Sarah Chen, and 3 others I didn't recognize, all wearing white lab coats that suggested they were the actual operators of this facility. "The officers found the basement levels," Frank was saying, his helpful demeanor completely gone now. "They've seen the memory modification equipment." One of the lab-coated figures, an elderly man with silver hair and cold eyes, examined the monitors we'd been looking at. "How much do they know?" "Enough to understand what we're doing here," Sarah replied. But her voice was different now, lacking the vacant pleasantness of her programmed state. "They made contact with my real personality during the interview. I tried to warn them, but the conditioning reasserted itself before I could give them useful information. The integration process will be more complex for law enforcement officers," the silver-haired man said. "Their training makes them more resistant to memory modification. We'll need to use the deep conditioning protocols." Bradley and I exchanged terrified glances. They were talking about subjecting us to the same memory alteration that had trapped everyone else in this place. "How long before they're missed?" another lab coat asked. "Their shift ends at 7 a.m., Frank replied. "If they don't report back, there will be additional officers here by 8 a.m. to look for them. Then we have approximately 6 hours to complete the initial processing," the silver-haired man decided. "Begin preparation of the modification chambers. We'll start with the younger officer. His mind should be more adaptable to the conditioning." They were talking about us as if we were already captured, already helpless subjects for their experiments. But they hadn't found us yet, and I was determined to make sure they never got the chance to strap us into those memory modification machines. The lab team left the room, presumably to prepare whatever equipment they used for processing new arrivals. As soon as the corridor was quiet, Bradley and I emerged from the storage closet and began looking for another way out of the basement levels. "The emergency stairs," Bradley said. "If we can get back to the stairwell, we might be able to reach the ground floor and get out of the building." But when we checked the corridor, we found that it had changed. The exit that had brought us to B6 was no longer there, replaced by more laboratory spaces that extended in directions that shouldn't have been possible within the building's original footprint. The building's reconfiguring itself, I realized. It's trapping us down here. We tried several different corridors, but each one led to more laboratories, more research areas, more evidence of the systematic imprisonment and psychological manipulation of dozens of people over the past 15 years. Finally, we found what appeared to be a maintenance area, with utility tunnels that might connect to the building's original infrastructure. The tunnels were narrow and dark, filled with pipes and electrical conduits, but they seemed to lead in the right direction. We crawled through the utility spaces for what felt like hours, following power cables and water lines that we hoped would lead us back to the main building systems. The air was thick and stifling, and several times we had to squeeze through spaces that were barely wide enough for a human body. Eventually, we emerged into a basement area that looked more like what we'd expected to find in an abandoned building. Concrete walls, rusted equipment, and the musty smell of long neglect. This was the real basement of the real Riverside manufacturing building, not the impossible research facility we'd discovered beneath it. We found an exit that led to the building's exterior, and I had never been so grateful to breathe fresh air and feel cold wind on my face. The abandoned industrial complex looked exactly as it should, dark, empty, and silent. But as we ran toward our patrol car, I looked back at Building 7 and saw something that confirmed our escape was only temporary. The windows were glowing with that warm, artificial light again, and I could see figures moving around inside, going about their business as if nothing had happened. "They're still in there," Bradley said, following my gaze. "All those people trapped in that place, having their memories stolen and their lives erased." We reached our patrol car and immediately called for backup, requesting every available unit plus supervisors, detectives, and federal agents if necessary. Whatever was happening at Riverside Manufacturing was far beyond anything local law enforcement could handle alone. But when the backup units arrived 20 minutes later, Building 7 was completely dark and empty. The search teams found no evidence of electrical power, no signs of recent habitation, and no trace of the sophisticated laboratory equipment we discovered in the basement levels. The building had returned to its abandoned state, as if the entire nightmare had never happened. Except for one thing, the basement levels we'd explored were gone. B4 through B7 simply didn't exist anymore. The building's foundation ended at B3, and below that was nothing but solid earth. Mass hallucination, the official report concluded, possibly caused by exposure to industrial chemicals that remained in the building after its closure. But Bradley and I knew better. We'd seen the memory modification equipment, read the files on the victims, witnessed the systematic imprisonment of dozens of people in a facility that existed partially outside normal reality. And sometimes on quiet nights when I'm patrolling Route 441, I see lights in Building 7 again. Not every night, and never when other officers are around, but often enough to know that the facility is still operating, still collecting people who get too close to the truth. I've tried going back several times, but the building is always empty when backup is present. Whatever controls that place has learned to be more careful, to only reveal itself to isolated individuals who can't prove what they've experienced. But I know that Sarah Chen is still in there, along with Frank Morrison and all the workers we met that night. They're still trapped in 2009, still having their memories altered to keep them compliant, still living the same day over and over while the outside world moves on without them. The worst part is the knowledge that this isn't unique. There are probably dozens of facilities like Riverside Manufacturing scattered across the country, hidden in abandoned buildings and forgotten places, collecting people who disappear without explanation, and adding them to populations of workers who exist outside normal time and space. I've tried researching similar cases, looking for patterns of disappearances near abandoned industrial sites. The data is there if you know how to look for it. People who vanish without trace near certain locations, buildings that show signs of activity despite being officially empty, reports of lights and sounds from facilities that shouldn't have power. But no one wants to believe it. The official response is always the same: hallucinations, hoaxes, misunderstandings. The truth is too strange, too threatening to the comfortable assumption that reality follows predictable rules. I'm still a state trooper, still patrolling the same highway, still responding to calls that range from routine to bizarre. But I'm more careful now about investigating abandoned buildings alone, more aware of the signs that suggest a place might be more than it appears. And I keep watching Building 7, waiting for the right opportunity to go back with enough evidence to prove what's happening there. Because somewhere in that impossible facility, Sarah Chen is still trying to break through her conditioning long enough to ask for help. Somewhere in that place where time doesn't work correctly, dozens of people are living the same manufactured day over and over. Their real lives stolen and their personalities rebuilt to serve purposes they can't understand or remember agreeing to. The lights are still there, glowing in windows that shouldn't have power, casting warm illumination into the darkness of an abandoned industrial complex that continues to operate 15 years after it officially closed. And sometimes, when atmospheric conditions are just right and the moon is hidden behind clouds, I can hear the sounds of machinery drifting across the empty fields from Building 7, the steady rhythm of manufacturing equipment, the distant voices of workers going about their endless shifts, and the subtle hum of technology that shouldn't exist. They're still there, still trapped, still hoping that someone will figure out how to reach them in the pocket of frozen time where they've been imprisoned. And someday, when I have the right backup and the right equipment and the right plan, I'm going back to get them out. Because some investigations never really end. They just wait for the right moment to resume, when the stars align correctly and the barriers between possible and impossible become thin enough for determined officers to push through. The case file says, unfounded, no evidence of criminal activity. But I know the truth. The evidence is still there, still operating, still collecting new victims who get too close to secrets that were never meant to be discovered. Building 7 is waiting, patient and confident, knowing that time is on its side and that eventually everyone who threatens its existence will either give up or disappear into the endless day where the workers live forever, but never really live at all. The night shift continues, somewhere between 2009 and forever, in a place where the badge on my chest means nothing, and the reality I've sworn to protect becomes just another illusion to be manufactured and controlled. But I remember. And that's the one thing their technology can't take away from someone who hasn't been strapped into their memory modification chair. I remember everything. What I'm about to document happened 4 months ago during what should have been a routine investigation into drug trafficking in the old subway tunnels beneath downtown. This case officially doesn't exist in our files, but 37 people are still missing, and I can't let their disappearances become just another set of unsolved cases that get filed away and forgotten. I've been working narcotics for 8 years, long enough to know that drug operations gravitate toward abandoned infrastructure like parasites seeking dark places to multiply. The old subway system beneath our city had been abandoned since the 1960s when budget cuts killed the project, leaving behind 12 miles of completed tunnels that connected to nothing and led nowhere. Over the decades, these tunnels had become a magnet for everything the surface world preferred to ignore. Homeless encampments, drug labs, illegal gambling operations, and worse. The city had made periodic attempts to seal the entrances, but new access points appeared faster than maintenance crews could close them. My partner for this investigation was Detective Ray Morrison, a veteran with 15 years in narcotics who had the kind of street knowledge that came from working every angle of the drug trade. We'd been tracking a new synthetic opioid called Ghost that was killing users faster than anything we'd seen before, and our informants kept pointing us toward the abandoned subway system. Word on the street is there's a whole operation down there, Morrison explained as we checked our equipment in the parking garage beneath police headquarters. Not just dealing, but manufacturing. Someone set up a lab in the tunnels and they're producing Ghost in quantities that suggest serious financial backing. The drug itself was unlike anything our forensics team had analyzed before. It was incredibly potent, highly addictive, and caused neurological effects that made users describe experiences of seeing through walls and talking to people who weren't there. 3 overdose victims had been found in impossible locations. Locked rooms with no keys, sealed storage units, and one case where a body was discovered inside a concrete pillar that had been poured around it. The coroner's report on that last one still gives me nightmares, Morrison said, loading extra batteries into his flashlight. Victim was found perfectly preserved inside solid concrete, but the concrete showed no signs of being broken and reformed. It was like the body had been placed there during the original construction in 1962. We were planning to enter the tunnel system through an access point in the basement of the old Riverside department store, a building that had been abandoned since the early 2000s. Intelligence suggested this entrance was being used regularly by the drug operation, and surveillance had recorded dozens of people entering but significantly fewer leaving. Could be multiple exit points, I suggested, though Morrison's expression suggested he didn't think it was that simple. Could be, he agreed. Or it could be something else entirely. The Riverside department store had been a downtown landmark for over 60 years before economic decline, and suburban shopping malls finally forced it to close. The building was a masterpiece of 1950s commercial architecture, all glass and steel with soaring ceilings and open floor plans designed to showcase merchandise to maximum effect. But now it stood empty, its windows covered with plywood and its entrances secured with chains and padlocks. We had the keys, provided by the city's property management department, but as we approached the main entrance, I noticed something that made me pause. "You see that?" I asked Morrison, pointing to fresh footprints in the accumulated dust around the entrance. He knelt to examine them more closely. Multiple people, different shoe sizes, and these prints are recent, maybe 12 hours old at most. The footprints led from the street to the main entrance, but there were no corresponding tracks leading away from the building. It was as if people had entered but never left, which matched the surveillance reports we'd received about the location. We unlocked the main entrance and stepped into what had once been the store's grand lobby. The space was vast and empty, with marble floors that echoed our footsteps and crystal chandeliers that hung dark and dusty from the ornate ceiling. But despite years of abandonment, the air inside felt wrong, charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Power's supposed to be disconnected," Morrison observed, noting that some of the emergency lighting was still functional. "But these fixtures are getting juice from somewhere." I was examining a directory board near the old information desk when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The store directory was still lit up, displaying department names and floor numbers in bright LED letters, but instead of menswear and home goods, the departments were listed as things like processing, conditioning, and final integration. "Morrison, look at this," I called, pointing to the directory. He joined me, and his expression grew troubled as he read the bizarre department listings. What the hell is final integration? And why would a department store have a processing department? Before I could answer, we heard the sound of an elevator arriving somewhere in the building. The distinctive chime of elevator doors opening, followed by the soft murmur of voices, as if people were getting off and going about their business. "Elevators shouldn't be working," Morrison said, drawing his service weapon. "Building's been without power for 3 years." We followed the sound toward the elevator bank, moving carefully through the empty sales floor. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space, and I noticed that the mannequins scattered throughout the store were positioned in poses that seemed to follow our movement with their eyeless gazes. The elevator bank consisted of 4 cars arranged along the back wall of the main floor. 3 of the elevators showed out-of-service signs, but the 4th was clearly operational. The floor indicator above its doors showed that it was currently stopped at the basement level, but as we watched, it began to rise. B3, B2, B1, ground floor. The doors opened with a soft chime, revealing an interior that was clean, well-lit, and modern, despite the building's abandoned condition. Soft music was playing from speakers in the ceiling, and the air that flowed out of the car carried the antiseptic smell of a medical facility. "This is impossible," Morrison muttered, but he kept his weapon ready as we approached the elevator. I peered inside the car and saw something that made my blood run cold. The control panel showed buttons for floors that shouldn't exist. Instead of the building's standard 5 floors, there were buttons labeled B1 through B7, plus additional buttons marked with symbols I didn't recognize. 7 basement levels, I said, in a building that's only supposed to have one. Morrison was examining the elevator's certification plaque. Last inspection was 3 days ago. But who the hell is conducting elevator inspections in an abandoned building? As we stood there trying to make sense of the impossible elevator, we heard footsteps approaching from deeper in the store. Multiple people walking with purpose, their voices growing clearer as they got closer. New shipment came in this morning, 12 units, all premium quality. Processing should be complete by midnight. Dr. Hendricks wants them moved to level B-5 for conditioning. Make sure the police patrols don't interfere. We've invested too much in this operation to have it disrupted now. Morrison and I exchanged alarmed glances. They were talking about police patrols, which meant they knew we were here, or at least expected us to come. We quickly moved away from the elevator bank and took cover behind a large display case, drawing our weapons and preparing for confrontation. The voices belonged to 3 individuals in white lab coats who emerged from what appeared to be a service corridor near the old customer service desk. They were carrying clipboards and speaking in the professional tones of people conducting normal business operations, but their conversation suggested activities that were anything but normal. Unit 47 showed exceptional response to the initial treatment, one of them was saying. Full memory suppression within 6 hours, and complete personality restructuring within 12. Dr. Hendricks will be pleased. What about the resistance cases? Another asked. The ones who keep trying to remember their previous lives? Extended conditioning protocol, the third replied. We've found that subjects who resist initial treatment require more intensive intervention, but the results are just as effective. Eventually, everyone adapts to their new reality. They were talking about people as if they were products in a manufacturing process, discussing memory suppression and personality restructuring with the casual efficiency of factory supervisors. Whatever operation was running in this building, it involved systematic psychological manipulation on a scale that suggested significant resources and organization. The 3 lab-coated figures entered the working elevator, and I could hear them discussing floor assignments as the car descended. Level B-3 for the new arrivals, B-5 for conditioning, and B-7 for final integration. Dr. Hendricks wants to review the progress reports before tomorrow's shipment. Morrison tried his radio to call for backup, but all he got was static interference. Cell phone signals were completely blocked, and even our GPS unit showed no location data. Whatever was happening in this building included sophisticated electronic countermeasures. We're on our own, he said quietly, and we need to find out what they're doing to people down there. The elevator returned to the ground floor within minutes, its doors opening to reveal the same clean, modern interior. But now, I noticed details that I'd missed before. Scratches on the floor that looked like they'd been made by people trying to resist being moved, and what appeared to be restraint attachment points built into the walls. This elevator's designed to transport prisoners, I realized. People who don't want to be moved. Morrison was examining the control panel more closely. Look at this. The buttons for the basement levels require a keycard to access, but the ground floor button doesn't. They want people to be able to go up, but not down, I said. unless they have authorization. That's when I noticed something lying on the elevator floor. A small piece of paper that looked like it had been dropped recently. I picked it up and found a handwritten note that made my stomach lurch. Help us. They're taking people from the streets and changing them into something else. Level B7. Tell my family I love them. Jennifer Walsh, badge 4521. Morrison read the note over my shoulder, and his face went pale. Jennifer Walsh. She disappeared 6 weeks ago during an undercover narcotics operation. Missing persons report said she was last seen investigating drug activity in the tunnel system. She made it this far, I said, but not far enough to escape. The elevator chimed softly, and the doors began to close automatically. Without authorization cards, we couldn't access the basement levels through normal means, but we needed to find another way down. If Jennifer Walsh and others were being held in the lower levels, we had a duty to locate and rescue them. Service stairwells, Morrison suggested. Old buildings like this always have emergency stairs that don't require electronic access. We found the service stairwell near the loading dock area, hidden behind a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. The door was unlocked, and beyond it was a concrete stairwell that extended both up and down from the ground level. The stairs going up led to the building's upper floors, which appeared to be empty storage and office space, but the stairs going down were a different story entirely. They were well lit, recently cleaned, and showed clear signs of regular use. We descended slowly, checking each landing for threats or surveillance equipment. The first basement level, B1, appeared to be storage and building services, with the sounds of machinery and air handling systems that suggested active maintenance operations. B2 was different. Through the fire door's small window, I could see a corridor lined with what appeared to be holding cells or isolation rooms. Each room had a small window, and through some of them, I could see people lying on narrow beds, apparently unconscious or sedated. Processing area, Morrison whispered, reading a sign mounted near the door. New arrivals are processed on B2 before advancement to conditioning levels. B3 was labeled Initial Conditioning, and the sounds coming through the door suggested active operations. Electronic beeping, the hum of medical equipment, and occasionally human voices that sounded distressed or confused. We need to see what's happening on these levels, I said, but we can't take on an entire operation with just 2 officers. We need backup, federal agents, medical personnel. And we need to get communications working, Morrison added. Jennifer Walsh has been missing for 6 weeks. If she's still alive, we need to get her out of here. But when Morrison tried the stairwell door that should have led back to the ground floor, it wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door seemed to be locked from the outside, trapping us in the stairwell. They know we're here, he said grimly. The whole building's designed to funnel people down into the lower levels. We had no choice but to continue descending, hoping to find another exit, or at least gather enough information to understand what we were dealing with. B4 was labeled Advanced Conditioning. B5 was Personality Integration, and B6 showed no label at all, just a red warning sign that read, Authorized Personnel Only, Extreme Hazard. At B7, the bottom of the stairwell, we found ourselves facing a heavy steel door marked Final Integration, Dr. Hendricks, Director. This was apparently the heart of whatever operation was running beneath the abandoned department store. The door was equipped with both a keycard reader and a numeric keypad, but when Morrison tried the handle, it opened easily. Beyond it was a corridor that looked like it belonged in a high-tech medical facility, with polished floors, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of clean, sterile atmosphere you'd find in a research hospital. But the sounds coming from the rooms along this corridor were anything but medical. Human voices, sometimes screaming, sometimes pleading, sometimes speaking in the flat, emotionless tones of people whose personalities had been fundamentally altered. "We're walking into the center of whatever this is," Morrison said, checking his weapon and spare ammunition. "Are you ready for this?" I wasn't sure anyone could be ready for what we were about to discover, but I nodded anyway. We had a job to do, and there were people in this facility who needed our help. The first room we checked contained what appeared to be a sophisticated brainwashing operation. A person was strapped into a chair surrounded by monitors, speakers, and devices that I couldn't identify. Their eyes were open but vacant, and electrodes attached to their head were feeding signals from a complex computer system. "Memory modification," Morrison said, reading information from one of the monitors. "They're erasing this person's memories and replacing them with programmed responses." The next room contained someone I recognized from missing persons reports. Michael Torres, a homeless man who had disappeared from downtown 2 months ago. But he was no longer the person described in the police reports. He sat motionless in a chair, staring ahead with empty eyes, responding to questions from a technician with the mechanical precision of a programmed robot. "State your name and identification number," the technician commanded. "Unit 47, Michael replied in a voice devoid of emotion, awaiting assignment to final integration protocol. "Previous identity status? Eliminated. No memory of previous existence. Ready for deployment." The technician made notes on a clipboard, apparently satisfied with Michael's responses. But when he noticed Morrison and me watching through the observation window, his expression shifted to alarm. "Security alert," he said into a wall-mounted intercom. "Unauthorized personnel on level B7. Initiate containment protocols." Immediately, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lighting activated, and we could hear the sound of multiple people moving with urgency through the corridors around us. "We need to find Jennifer Walsh and get out of here," I said. But even as I spoke, I realized that escape might not be possible. The facility was clearly designed to contain people, and we had walked directly into its most secure area. "Room by room," Morrison said. "We check every space until we find her." But as we moved down the corridor, the rooms we entered showed increasingly disturbing evidence of what was being done to people in this place. Psychological conditioning chambers where subjects were exposed to repeated messages designed to break down their resistance. Medical areas where surgical procedures were being performed to implant devices that appeared to control behavior. And storage areas filled with personal belongings taken from people who would no longer need them because their identities had been completely erased. In the final room at the end of the corridor, we found Dr. Hendricks himself. He was an elderly man in his 70s, wearing a white lab coat and surrounded by banks of monitoring equipment that displayed data from throughout the facility. When he saw us enter, he didn't seem surprised or alarmed. "Officers Santos and Morrison," he said, consulting a file on his desk. "We've been expecting you. Your arrival was predicted by our behavioral analysis models." "Where is Jennifer Walsh?" Morrison demanded, his weapon pointed directly at Dr. Hendricks. "Unit 23 completed final integration 3 weeks ago," Dr. Hendricks replied calmly. "She's currently assigned to our Street Operations Division, helping to identify and recruit new subjects for the program." The implications of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. Jennifer Walsh hadn't just been kidnapped and imprisoned. She had been psychologically reprogrammed to work for her captors, helping them identify and capture other victims. "You're under arrest," I said, but Dr. Hendricks simply smiled. "I'm afraid that's not possible, Detective Santos. You see, you've both been exposed to our conditioning protocols since the moment you entered this building. The elevator music, the air circulation system, even the lighting frequencies have been carefully calibrated to begin the initial stages of personality modification. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, and Morrison was blinking rapidly as if trying to clear his vision. The subtle influences Dr. Hendricks was describing had apparently been affecting us since we'd arrived, weakening our resistance to whatever they planned to do to us. The process is quite humane, Dr. Hendricks continued, as technicians in white coats began entering the room. Your memories will be preserved in our archives, and your new personalities will be based on comprehensive psychological profiles that ensure optimal performance in your assigned roles. What roles? Morrison asked, his voice slightly slurred. Law enforcement operatives, of course. Who better to identify and recruit new subjects than police officers who appear to be conducting normal investigations? You'll be reassigned to missing persons cases, where you'll help ensure that certain disappearances are never adequately investigated. The technicians were approaching us with devices that looked like high-tech restraints, and I realized that our weapons were becoming too heavy to hold properly. Whatever they had been exposing us to was affecting our motor control and cognitive function. You can't just erase people, I managed to say, fighting against the growing lethargy. We're not erasing them, Dr. Hendricks corrected. We're improving them, removing the chaos and unpredictability that makes human behavior so inefficient. Our subjects become exactly what they need to be, nothing more, nothing less. As the technicians fitted the restraints around our wrists, I caught sight of a monitor that showed the upper levels of the building. The abandoned department store was bustling with activity, filled with people who moved with the same mechanical precision I'd seen in Michael Torres. Former missing persons cases, all of them reprogrammed to serve the operation that had captured them. How many? Morrison asked, still fighting the effects of whatever they had drugged us with. Over 200 successful integrations in the past 5 years, Dr. Hendricks said proudly. Police officers, social workers, federal agents, journalists who were getting too close to the truth. All of them now contributing to our mission instead of opposing it. As they wheeled us toward what appeared to be the conditioning chambers, I saw her. Jennifer Walsh, standing near a monitoring station, wearing the same white lab coat as the other technicians. But her face was blank, emotionless, showing no recognition when she looked at Morrison and me. Unit 23, Dr. Hendricks called to her. Please prepare the personality suppression protocols for our new arrivals. Yes, Doctor, Jennifer replied in the same flat tone I'd heard from Michael Torres, initiating suppression sequence for law enforcement subjects. She began adjusting controls on a complex console, and I realized that she was about to perform the same procedure on us that had been performed on her. The police officer who had come here to investigate drug trafficking was now actively participating in the destruction of other officers' identities. Jennifer, I said, hoping that some part of her original personality might still exist beneath the programming. I know you're in there. Fight it. For just a moment, her movements hesitated. A flicker of confusion passed across her face, and she looked at me with something that might have been recognition. I remember, she whispered. But then Dr. Hendricks spoke sharply. Unit 23, you will complete the preparation sequence immediately. Jennifer's expression went blank again, and she resumed her work on the controls. Yes, Doctor. Preparation sequence proceeding normally. As they strapped me into the conditioning chair, I felt electrodes being attached to my head and arms. Monitors around the room began displaying my vital signs and what appeared to be brain activity patterns. In a few minutes, Detective Maria Santos would cease to exist, replaced by a programmed operative whose only purpose was to serve Dr. Hendricks' organization. But just as the conditioning sequence was about to begin, The facility's alarm system activated again. Not the security alert we'd triggered earlier, but a different alarm that seemed to indicate external threat. Federal agents are entering the building, a voice announced over the intercom. All units to defensive positions. Initiate emergency protocols. Dr. Hendricks looked troubled for the first time since we'd met him. Impossible. Our intelligence assets indicated no federal investigation. Doctor, one of the technicians called from a monitoring station. We're showing multiple law enforcement vehicles surrounding the building. DEA, FBI, and local SWAT units. I felt a surge of hope. Somehow, backup had arrived, though I couldn't understand how they'd found us when our communications had been blocked. Complete the conditioning sequence immediately, Dr. Hendricks ordered. If these subjects are rescued with their memories intact, they'll expose the entire operation. But before the technicians could activate the conditioning equipment, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a few seconds later, but the brief blackout had apparently disrupted their computer systems. Primary conditioning protocols are offline, Jennifer reported, her voice showing the first signs of emotion since we'd encountered her. I can't remember how to restart them. Manual procedures, Dr. Hendricks snapped, but it was too late. The confusion caused by the power interruption had given Jennifer's suppressed personality a chance to resurface, and she was looking around the room with growing awareness of what she was doing. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the conditioning chair where I was strapped down. "What have I been doing? What have they made me do?" She began frantically working the controls, but now she was trying to shut down the system rather than activate it. "I'm a police officer," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Detective Jennifer Walsh, Metro PD. I came here to investigate drug trafficking, and they changed me into something else." The sounds of gunfire and shouting were getting closer as federal agents fought their way through the building's security systems. Dr. Hendricks was speaking urgently into a handheld radio, apparently coordinating some kind of evacuation or destruction protocol. "Initiate data purge," he commanded. "All subject files, conditioning protocols, everything. We cannot allow this research to fall into government hands." Jennifer finished releasing my restraints and moved to help Morrison. "We have to get out of here," she said. "There are explosive charges throughout the facility. If they trigger them, everyone in the building will be killed." But as we tried to leave the conditioning chamber, we found that the corridors were filled with the reprogrammed subjects, all of them moving with mechanical precision to defensive positions throughout the facility. They were armed and apparently programmed to defend the operation that had enslaved them, even at the cost of their own lives. "They're not responsible for their actions," Jennifer warned, as we encountered a group of former missing persons who were now blocking our escape route. "Their personalities have been completely replaced. They'll kill us without hesitation if their programming tells them to." Morrison tried reasoning with them, identifying himself as a police officer and ordering them to stand down. But their response was immediate and violent. They opened fire without warning, forcing us to take cover behind medical equipment in one of the conditioning rooms. We can't fight our way through them, I realized. There are too many, and they're not going to respond to anything except their programming. "The federal agents," Jennifer said. "If we can reach them, maybe they can help us get these people out before the building is destroyed." But reaching the federal agents meant fighting through dozens of reprogrammed subjects who would kill anyone they perceived as a threat to their mission. And we were running out of time, as the sounds of systematic destruction suggested that Dr. Hendricks was implementing his data purge protocol. That's when Morrison had an idea that was either brilliant or suicidal. The conditioning equipment, If they used it to reprogram these people, maybe we can use it to reverse the process. Jennifer shook her head. It's not that simple. The personality suppression process causes permanent neurological changes. Even if we could access the original memories, there's no guarantee we could restore them. But we have to try, Morrison insisted. We can't just leave them like this. As federal agents fought their way down from the upper levels and explosions began rocking the lower sections of the facility, Jennifer worked frantically with the conditioning equipment, trying to find a way to reverse the programming that had enslaved over 200 people. I think I found something, she said, pointing to a complex array of controls. There's a master override protocol, probably designed for emergency situations. It might be able to disrupt the conditioning signals throughout the entire facility. Do it, I said, but Jennifer hesitated. If this works, all the reprogrammed subjects will suddenly remember who they really are. The shock of realizing what's been done to them, what they've been forced to do. Some of them might not survive the psychological trauma. It was an impossible choice. Leave them programmed and enslaved, or risk their sanity and lives in an attempt to restore their true identities. But as explosions continued to rock the building and gunfire echoed through the corridors, we realized that doing nothing would mean certain death for everyone. Do it, Morrison said. Give them a chance to be themselves again, even if it's only for a few minutes. Jennifer activated the override protocol, and immediately, every monitor in the facility showed the same message. Emergency personality restoration. All conditioning protocols suspended. The effect was instant and dramatic. Throughout the building, we could hear the voices of people crying out in confusion, fear, and recognition as their true memories returned. The mechanical precision of their movements gave way to human emotion, and the sounds of conflict began to change as former victims realized what had been done to them. Federal agents, this is Detective Maria, Santos Metro PD. I shouted into my radio, hoping that the communications blackout had been lifted with the rest of the facility's systems. We have over 200 victims of psychological conditioning in the basement levels. They're going to need immediate medical and psychiatric care. The response came back immediately. Roger that, Detective Santos. Medical units are standing by. Can you provide a safe corridor for evacuation? But even as federal agents began reaching the lower levels and coordinating the rescue of the facility's victims, I knew that the real work was just beginning. 200 people would need to rebuild their lives after having their identities stolen and their minds enslaved. Some of them had been missing for years, and their families had given up hope of ever seeing them again. Dr. Hendricks was captured trying to escape through a utility tunnel, but his research data had been largely destroyed in the explosion that devastated the upper levels of the building. Whatever techniques he had developed for memory suppression and personality modification would hopefully die with his operation. Jennifer Walsh spent 6 months in psychiatric care, working to integrate her restored memories with the artificial personality that had been imposed on her. When she finally returned to duty, she was assigned to a new task force focused on investigating similar operations that might exist in other locations. This wasn't unique, she told me during one of our briefings. Dr. Hendricks mentioned research facilities in other cities, other operations that were using his techniques for different purposes. We barely scratched the surface of what's out there. The official reports classified the incident as a case of kidnapping and unlawful detention involving experimental psychological manipulation. Most of the details were sealed under national security protocols, and the media coverage focused on the rescue operation rather than the true scope of what had been discovered. But I know that somewhere, in other abandoned buildings and forgotten places, similar operations continue to function, collecting people who won't be missed, erasing their identities and turning them into programmable assets for purposes we can only imagine. The victims we rescued are slowly rebuilding their lives, but the psychological scars will never fully heal. They remember being reduced to numbers, having their personalities deleted and replaced with artificial constructs designed to serve their captors' purposes. And sometimes, late at night when I'm working missing persons cases, I wonder about the people who disappear without explanation. Are they really gone? Or are they still out there somewhere, walking around with different names and altered memories, serving masters they can't even remember agreeing to serve? The abandoned department store was demolished 6 months after the raid, but the tunnels beneath it remain. And sometimes, when I drive past that empty lot, I think about the 200 people who were trapped in those underground chambers, their minds stolen and their lives erased, until a chance power failure gave them a moment to remember who they really were. The case file says, closed. Suspects apprehended, victims recovered. But I know the truth. This was just one operation in a network that spans the country, collecting human beings like commodities and processing them into something that serves a purpose we still don't fully understand. And somewhere out there, Dr. Hendrick's colleagues continue their work, perfecting techniques for stealing memories and manufacturing personalities, confident that what they learned from his failure will make them harder to detect and impossible to stop. The underground never really ended. It just moved deeper, became more careful, and learned to hide its tracks better. But we're watching now. We know what to look for, and someday we'll find them all. This happened 3 months ago during my night patrol in the West Side District, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about those phone calls. The department says the case is closed, but I know better. Some things don't just end because paperwork says they do. I've been working the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift for 4 years now, covering the residential areas where most of our calls involve domestic disputes, break-ins, and the occasional drunk driver. It's steady work, the kind where you develop routines and learn to read the rhythm of the neighborhood. You get to know which houses always have their porch lights on, which dogs bark at every siren, and which streets are safe to patrol alone. The West Side District is mostly working-class families in houses built during the 1970s housing boom. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the kind of neighborhood where kids still ride their bikes after dark and neighbors know each other's names. Not the sort of place where you expect to encounter something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. It started on a Tuesday night in September with what seemed like a routine 911 call. Dispatch came through my radio at 11:47 p.m. with a domestic disturbance report at 1247 Maple Avenue. The caller had hung up before providing details, but the address was in my patrol area, so I responded immediately. Unit 23, en route to 1247 Maple Avenue for domestic disturbance. I radioed to dispatch. ETA 3 minutes. Copy that, Unit 23. Be advised, caller sounded distressed but disconnected before providing information about the nature of the disturbance. I pulled up to 1247 Maple Avenue expecting to find the usual scenario. Raised voices, maybe some broken furniture. Neighbors complaining about the noise. The house was a modest 2-story colonial with a small front yard and a driveway that held a single sedan. Porch light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. I approached the front door and knocked 3 times, following standard protocol. Police department responding to a 911 call. No answer. No sounds of argument or distress from inside. I knocked again, louder this time. Hello? Anyone home? This is Officer Park with Metro Police. Still nothing. I walked around the perimeter of the house, checking windows and looking for signs of forced entry or disturbance. Everything appeared normal, secure, undisturbed. The caller might have been at the wrong address, or the situation might have resolved itself before I arrived. I was heading back to my patrol car when my radio crackled again. Unit 23, we have another call from 1247 Maple Avenue. Caller is requesting immediate assistance. I stopped and looked back at the dark house. Dispatch, I'm still on scene at 1247 Maple. House appears empty. No response to my presence. Did the caller provide any additional information? Negative, Unit 23. Caller whispered, "He's here. He's inside the house." And then the line went dead. A chill ran down my spine. I drew my flashlight and service weapon, approaching the house with much more caution than I'd shown during my initial response. If someone was inside the house and the occupants were in danger, I needed to take this seriously. I tried the front door and found it unlocked. That was the first red flag. People don't call 911 about intruders and then leave their doors unlocked. I pushed the door open and called into the house. "Police, anyone inside, please identify yourself." My voice echoed in what appeared to be an empty house. I entered slowly, flashlight sweeping the interior, announcing my presence and authority with each step. The house was modestly furnished but well maintained, with family photos on the walls and children's toys scattered in the living room. But there was no one home. No family, no intruder, no sign that anyone had been in the house recently. The mail was piled up on a side table, suggesting the occupants had been gone for several days. I was completing my search of the first floor when my radio squawked again. Unit 23, third call from 1247 Maple Avenue. Caller said, "He knows you're here now," and disconnected. I felt ice water run through my veins. Someone was watching me, calling 911 to report my presence in the house. But from where? I'd searched every room on the ground floor and there was nobody here. Dispatch, can you trace these calls? I need to know where they're originating from. Working on it, Unit 23, please maintain your position. I continued searching the house, moving upstairs to check the bedrooms and bathrooms. Each room was empty, but I was beginning to feel like someone was watching my every move. The sensation was so strong that I kept spinning around, expecting to see a figure in the shadows behind me. The master bedroom was at the end of the hallway, its door standing slightly ajar. I approached it carefully, weapon ready, and pushed the door open with my flashlight. The room was empty, but something was wrong. The bed was made, but there was an indentation in the covers as if someone had been lying there recently. And on the nightstand was a cordless phone, its base station blinking with an active call indicator. As I approached the phone, it rang. I stared at it for 3 rings before picking it up. "Hello?" "Officer Park." The voice was male, calm, and somehow familiar, despite the fact that I was certain I'd never heard it before. "You shouldn't be in my house." "Who is this?" "Are you the homeowner?" "I'm someone who's been waiting for you to arrive. I've been watching you search my house, and I have to say, your technique is quite thorough." I looked around the room, trying to locate where he might be hiding. "Sir, I need you to show yourself. I'm responding to 911 calls that appear to have originated from this location." "Oh, those calls definitely originated from this location. I made them specifically to bring you here." The line went dead. I immediately called dispatch. "This is Unit 23. I've made contact with the caller." Male voice, claims to be the homeowner, says he's been watching me search the house. But I can't locate him anywhere on the premises. Copy that, Unit 23. Backup is en route, ETA 5 minutes. Can you maintain contact with the caller? Before I could respond, the phone rang again. I answered immediately. "Where are you?" I demanded. "I'm everywhere in this house, Officer Park. I'm in the walls, in the shadows, in the spaces between what you can see and what you can't see." "That's not an answer. Show yourself, or I'm going to assume you're an intruder and treat this as a hostile situation." "Hostile? No, Officer Park. This isn't hostile at all. This is intimate. I know so much about you. 4 years on the force, divorced last year. Apartment on the south side of town. You drive a blue Honda Civic when you're off duty, and you stop at Murphy's Diner for coffee every morning before going home." My blood ran cold. Those were details about my personal life that weren't available to the general public. "How do you know that?" "I've been studying you, Officer Park, watching your routines, learning your habits. You're a very predictable person, which makes you perfect for what I have planned." The line went dead again, but this time I could hear footsteps somewhere in the house. Not the sound of someone walking normally, but a deliberate, measured pace that seemed to be moving through areas I'd already searched. I left the master bedroom and followed the sound, but it always seemed to stay just ahead of me, leading me through the house like a game of cat and mouse. Every time I thought I was getting close, the footsteps would stop, and then start up again in a different part of the house. My backup arrived as I was searching the basement, their car lights flashing through the small windows near the ceiling. Officers Jenny Martinez and Tom Bradley entered through the front door, and I could hear them conducting their own search of the areas I'd already covered. "Park, where are you?" Martinez called. "Basement, still searching for the caller." The phone in my hand rang again. I answered it before the first ring finished. "Your friends are here," the voice said. "That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could have more time alone together. We can have all the time you want if you just show yourself." "But that would spoil the surprise, Officer Park. You see, this isn't really about finding me. This is about understanding that I can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime I choose. Tonight it's you. Tomorrow it might be Officer Martinez. Next week it could be Officer Bradley." I could hear Martinez and Bradley moving through the house above me, their radios crackling as they coordinated their search. But I was focused entirely on the voice on the phone, trying to understand what kind of person I was dealing with. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to understand that the illusion of safety you carry around is exactly that. An illusion. You think your badge protects you, that your training makes you prepared for anything. But you're not prepared for me. Try me. Look behind you." I spun around, weapon raised, but the basement was empty. Just concrete walls, exposed ceiling joists, and the mechanical equipment that serviced the house. "There's nothing here," I said into the phone. "Check the furnace." I approached the furnace cautiously, keeping the phone pressed to my ear. It was an older gas unit, probably installed when the house was built. But as I got closer, I could smell something wrong. Not the clean smell of natural gas, but something organic and putrid. "Open the access panel," the voice instructed. "I'm not following your orders. Open the access panel, or I'll make another call. This time to Officer Martinez's cell phone. Would you like to know her personal number?" He rattled off a 10-digit number that I recognized as Martinez's personal cell. Information. That should have been confidential department data. I holstered my weapon and opened the furnace access panel. Inside, where the gas jets should have been, was a human hand, severed at the wrist, wearing a wedding ring, and preserved well enough to suggest it hadn't been there very long. "Jesus Christ," I breathed into the phone. "That belonged to the previous homeowner," the voice said conversationally. "Mr. Robert Chen, age 43, married with 2 children. He thought his home security system would protect his family. He was wrong." I backed away from the furnace, my mind racing. Where's the family? Where are the children? Oh, they're safe, for now. But their safety depends entirely on how well you follow instructions. Martinez's voice called down from upstairs. Park, you okay down there? I need you and Bradley down here immediately, I called back, still holding the phone to my ear. Now you're involving your colleagues, the voice said, with what sounded like disappointment. That complicates things. Where are the Chen family? Close, very close. In fact, you've probably already seen them without realizing it. Martinez and Bradley came down the basement stairs and I showed them what I'd found in the furnace. Bradley immediately called for the crime scene unit while Martinez tried to contact the homeowner through property records. David Park, I said into the phone, loud enough for my colleagues to hear. Address is 1247 Maple Avenue. We've found evidence of foul play and need immediate technical support. But I wasn't talking to dispatch. I was talking to the voice on the phone, trying to establish the facts of the situation for my backup while maintaining contact with our suspect. Very clever, Officer Park, but you should know that your crime scene unit won't find what they're looking for. I'm much more careful than that. Martinez looked at me strangely. Who are you talking to? I held up the phone. Suspect called 911 to lure me here. He's been providing information about the location of evidence. Suspect is still on the line? Bradley asked. I nodded, but when I put the phone back to my ear, there was only a dial tone. The caller had disconnected. Lost him, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, Martinez's personal cell phone started ringing. She looked at the display with confusion. Unknown number. Don't answer it, I said quickly, but she'd already accepted the call. Officer Martinez speaking. I watched her face go pale as she listened to whoever was on the other end. After about 30 seconds, she hung up and looked at me with frightened eyes. He knows where I live, she said quietly. He described my apartment, my car, my morning routine. He said I have 15 minutes to convince you to leave this house, or he's going to visit me at home tonight. Bradley was calling for additional backup and requesting priority response from the detective division, but I knew that wouldn't help us. Whoever we were dealing with had resources and information that suggested this was much more than a simple home invasion gone wrong. What did he tell you? I asked Martinez. He said to tell you that the Chen family is in the walls. That's all. The Chen family is in the walls. We spent the next 2 hours systematically searching every inch of the house, looking for hidden spaces or concealed areas where people might be hidden. The crime scene unit found traces of blood in multiple locations, but no bodies and no obvious signs of where the family might have been taken. But as we were preparing to expand our search to the surrounding area, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The family photos I'd seen earlier, the ones scattered throughout the house, showing the Chen family at various stages of their lives, were different now. In every photograph, the family members appeared to be looking directly at the camera with expressions of terror and desperation. Children who had been smiling in playground photos now looked like they were screaming for help. Parents who had been posing happily at family gatherings now appeared to be reaching toward the viewer with desperate, pleading gestures. Martinez, look at these photos, I said, pointing to a family portrait hanging in the living room. She studied it carefully. What am I looking for? The expressions, don't they look different to you? She examined the photograph more closely, then shook her head. They look normal to me. Happy family, professional portrait. Why? I stared at the photo, seeing the same terrified expressions that had made my blood run cold moments earlier. But apparently, I was the only one who could see them that way. My radio crackled with a call from dispatch. Unit 23, We've received another call requesting your presence at 1247 Maple Avenue. Caller specifically asked for Officer David Park. I'm already on scene at that location, I responded. Copy that, Unit 23. Caller said to tell you that visiting hours are almost over. Bradley and I exchanged glances. Did dispatch get a trace on that call? Negative, came the response. Call appears to have originated from a landline at 1247 Maple Avenue. I looked at the cordless phone I'd been using earlier. It was sitting on the kitchen counter where I'd left it, but the base station was now showing an active call indicator. I picked up the handset. Officer Park. Time's running out, the familiar voice said. Your colleagues are starting to understand that this situation is beyond their expertise. Soon, they'll call for federal assistance, and then everything becomes much more complicated. What do you want? I want you to understand that there are people in this world who exist in the spaces between normal reality and nightmare. People who can reach into your life and rearrange it according to their desires. Are you holding the Chen family? I'm not holding them, Officer Park. I'm preserving them. They exist now in a state where they can never be hurt, never be lost, never be forgotten. They're part of something larger than their individual lives. Where are they? Look up. I raised my eyes to the ceiling, and for just a moment I thought I saw faces pressed against the drywall from the inside. The faces of the Chen family looking down at me with expressions of terror and desperate hope. But when I blinked, there was nothing there except ordinary ceiling tiles. You're losing your mind, Martinez said, watching my reaction to something she couldn't see. The walls, I said, remembering what the caller had told Martinez earlier. He said they're in the walls. We spent another hour examining the walls throughout the house, using electronic devices to detect hollow spaces and temperature variations that might indicate concealed areas. But the house's construction was solid, with no hidden rooms or passages that could conceal 3 people. As dawn approached and our shift neared its end, I realized that we weren't going to find the Chen family through conventional search methods. Whatever had happened to them was beyond the scope of normal police work. I'm staying here, I told Martinez and Bradley as they prepared to turn the scene over to the day shift. I need to maintain contact with the caller. David, you've been here for 7 hours, Martinez said. You need rest, and you need perspective. Let the detectives handle it from here. But I knew that the detectives would treat this as a standard missing persons case, looking for logical explanations and following conventional investigative procedures. They wouldn't understand that we were dealing with something that operated outside the rules of normal reality. As my colleagues left, I sat in the Chen family's living room with the cordless phone in my hand, waiting for it to ring again. The house felt different now, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl and my mind race with possibilities I didn't want to consider. At 6:15 a.m., just as the sun was beginning to rise, the phone rang. Officer Park. Still here, I see. I'm not leaving until I find the Chen family. You've already found them. You just don't understand what you're seeing. Explain it to me. They exist now in the space between dimensions, between reality and possibility. They're alive, but not in any way that your physical world can accommodate. They can see you, hear you, but they can't reach you any more than you can reach them. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen their faces in the photographs, in the ceiling, in reflections that shouldn't exist. Your mind is trying to process something that transcends normal sensory experience. I looked around the room, and this time I didn't just see faces in the ceiling. I could see the entire Chen family standing in the corners of the room, translucent and shimmering like heat mirages, watching me with expressions that mixed hope and desperation. There are others, the voice continued. Families who have vanished from their homes without a trace, leaving behind only the impression that something impossible has happened. Police investigate, find no evidence of conventional crime, and eventually file the cases as unsolved mysteries. How many others? Dozens, maybe hundreds. People who exist now in the spaces between what is and what could be, preserved in a state where they can never truly die, but can never truly live. The Chen family figures in the room were becoming more solid, more real, as if my acknowledgement of their presence was somehow strengthening their connection to our reality. But they still couldn't speak, couldn't move beyond the boundaries of whatever space they now occupied. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to understand that your reality is much more fragile than you believe. That there are forces in this world that can reach into your life and change the fundamental nature of your existence. Why the Chen family? Why them specifically? They were convenient, a family with no extended relatives, few close friends, the kind of people who could disappear without generating too much outside attention. Perfect subjects for my research. Research into what? The boundaries between dimensions. The possibility of preserving human consciousness in spaces that exist parallel to your physical reality." As he spoke, I realized that the Chen family figures in the room were trying to communicate with me. They were pointing toward different areas of the house, gesturing urgently as if trying to direct my attention to something important. "They're trying to tell me something," I said into the phone. "Of course they are. They want you to help them return to your reality, but that's impossible. The process that moved them into their current state is irreversible. You don't know that for certain. I know more about the nature of dimensional barriers than anyone else alive. The Chen family exists now in a state that transcends physical reality. They're not dead, but they're not alive in any way that matters." The family figures were becoming more agitated, their gestures more urgent. The father was pointing toward the basement, the mother toward the second floor, and the children toward the front door. They were trying to tell me something about the layout of the house, about locations that might be significant. "There's a way to bring them back," I said, though I had no idea where that certainty came from. "Even if there were, Officer Park, the cost would be more than you're willing to pay. To return them to your reality, someone else would have to take their place in the dimensional space they now occupy." The implication was clear. If I wanted to rescue the Chen family, I would have to sacrifice myself, trading my existence in normal reality for theirs in whatever impossible space they now inhabited. "Think carefully," the voice continued. "You have a life, a career, people who depend on you. Is saving 3 strangers worth giving up everything you are?" I looked at the Chen family figures, seeing the hope in their eyes, the desperate faith that somehow, someone would find a way to bring them home. They were innocent people who had been victimized by forces beyond their understanding, trapped in a nightmare that they'd done nothing to deserve. "Tell me what I need to do," I said into the phone. "You need to understand that crossing dimensional barriers requires a specific resonance frequency that can only be achieved through electromagnetic equipment calibrated to precise specifications. Speak English. The basement. There's equipment in the basement that I've been using to manipulate the boundaries between realities. If you activate it, you can create a temporary bridge that might allow the Chen family to return to your dimension. And what happens to me? You take their place. You exist in the space between realities while they return to their normal lives." I looked at the Chen family figures again, seeing the tears streaming down their translucent faces, the way they reached toward me with desperate gratitude even though they couldn't physically touch anything in our reality. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't, but you also don't have any other options. The Chen family will remain trapped forever unless someone takes action to free them. I ended the call and headed toward the basement, my mind racing with the implications of what I was about to do. If the caller was telling the truth, I was about to sacrifice my existence in normal reality to save 3 people I'd never met. If he was lying, I might be walking into a trap that would accomplish nothing except adding my name to the list of people who had vanished without explanation. The basement looked different now. What had appeared to be normal mechanical equipment earlier was revealed as sophisticated electronic apparatus when I looked more carefully. Devices that hummed with power despite the house's utilities being disconnected. Displays showing wavelengths and frequencies that meant nothing to me, and a central control panel that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The cordless phone was ringing again. I answered it as I approached the control panel. Second thoughts, Officer Park? Tell me how this works. The red switch activates the dimensional resonance field. The blue dial controls the frequency range. You'll need to set it to 7.3 megahertz and hold the activation switch for exactly 30 seconds. And then you'll understand what it means to exist in the space between realities. You'll be conscious, aware, but unable to interact with the physical world in any meaningful way. I could see the Chen family figures more clearly now, standing at the bottom of the basement stairs, watching my every move with expressions that mixed hope and terror. They knew what I was, contemplating, and they understood the cost I would pay for their freedom. Is there any way back? I asked. Theoretically, yes. If someone else discovered the equipment and was willing to take your place, you could return to normal reality. But the chances of that happening are essentially 0. I placed my hand on the red activation switch, feeling the vibration of whatever energy was flowing through the equipment. In a few seconds, I would cease to exist in any meaningful way, preserved only as a consciousness trapped in a space that couldn't sustain normal human life. Officer Park. The voice on the phone was different now, gentler, almost pleading. You don't have to do this. You can walk away, file a report about missing persons, and let the case become just another unsolved mystery. No, I said, I can't do that. I set the blue dial to 7.3 megahertz and pressed the red activation switch. The world exploded into light and sound that transcended anything I'd ever experienced. Every atom in my body felt like it was being pulled apart and rearranged according to principles that had nothing to do with normal physics. I could see colors that didn't exist, hear sounds that had no source, feel sensations that my nervous system wasn't designed to process. And then, silence. I was standing in the basement, but everything was different. The equipment was still there, but it looked old and abandoned, covered with dust and cobwebs as if it hadn't been used in decades. The Chen family was gone, returned to their normal reality, while I remained trapped in the space they had occupied. I could see the basement, the house, the street outside, but I couldn't interact with any of it. When I tried to pick up objects, my hands passed through them like they were made of air. When I attempted to speak, no sound emerged. I existed in a state of awareness without substance, consciousness without physical form. The cordless phone was still on the basement floor where I dropped it when the dimensional transfer began. As I watched, it started ringing. I couldn't answer it, but I could hear the conversation when the caller picked up. Officer Martinez speaking. This is Robert Chen. I wanted to thank you for finding my family. We don't remember much about where we've been for the past 3 days, but we're grateful to be home safe. Mr. Chen, we've been searching for you and your family for weeks. Where have you been? I honestly don't know. It's all very confused in my memory. But Officer Park saved us somehow. Is he available? We'd like to thank him personally. There was a long pause before Martinez responded. Mr. Chen, Officer David Park was reported missing 3 days ago. He disappeared while investigating your case, and we haven't been able to locate him. That's impossible. He was just here. He activated some kind of equipment in our basement, and then we were free. I listened to the conversation with growing understanding. From the perspective of normal reality, I had vanished 3 days ago. The same day, the Chen family had been reported missing. But in the space where I now existed, time moved differently. Events occurred in sequences that didn't follow normal causality. The investigation into my disappearance followed the same pattern as the Chen family case. Extensive searches found no evidence of foul play, no logical explanation for my vanishing, no leads that pointed toward conventional crime. Eventually, the case was filed as an unsolved mystery. Another police officer who had simply vanished without explanation. But I wasn't really gone. I existed in the space between realities, aware of everything that happened in the normal world but unable to participate in it. I could see my colleagues conducting their investigation, watch my apartment being searched, observe the memorial service that the department held when I was officially declared missing. And sometimes, late at night when conditions were right, I could make contact with people who were particularly sensitive to dimensional boundaries. I could make phones ring, cause electronics to malfunction, create the subtle disturbances that made people feel like they were being watched. I tried to help other officers who encountered situations similar to mine, cases where families vanished without explanation, or where evidence suggested that something impossible had occurred. But my ability to communicate was limited, and most people dismissed the strange phone calls and electronic anomalies as coincidence or equipment failure. The Chen family returned to their normal lives, though they retained fragmentary memories of their experience in the space between realities. They moved away from the house on Maple Avenue within a month, claiming that they could still feel a presence there, still sense that something was watching them from the shadows. The house was eventually sold to new owners who reported no unusual activities. The basement equipment had vanished, apparently removed by whoever had installed it in the first place. But sometimes, on quiet nights when atmospheric conditions were particularly conducive to dimensional contact, residents of the neighborhood reported strange phone calls from disconnected numbers, voices that claimed to be police officers investigating cases that had been closed years earlier. I learned that the voice I'd been speaking with belonged to someone who existed in the same dimensional space as I did now. A researcher who had been trapped there decades earlier while conducting experiments into the nature of reality itself. He had been using his knowledge to manipulate the boundaries between dimensions, creating situations that would bring sensitive individuals into contact with the equipment needed to rescue trapped victims. "You're not the first police officer to make this choice," he told me during one of our conversations in the space between realities. "There have been others over the years, people who were willing to sacrifice themselves to save innocent victims." How many others? Dozens, maybe hundreds. We exist now as a community of displaced consciousness, watching over the normal world and trying to help when we can. Is there really no way back? There might be. If someone discovered the principles behind dimensional manipulation and was willing to risk everything to rescue us, it might be possible to return multiple consciousness streams to normal reality simultaneously. But the chances are essentially zero. The chances are whatever we make them. Every time we successfully guide someone to rescue trapped victims, we create the possibility that they might develop the knowledge and resources needed to help us return. So I continue to exist in the space between realities, watching over the normal world and waiting for the opportunity to help other officers who encounter cases that transcend conventional explanation. Sometimes I can make contact, provide information, guide investigations toward the equipment or knowledge needed to rescue dimensional prisoners. And sometimes, when conditions are perfect and the barriers between realities become thin enough, I can make phone calls to the living world. Brief conversations with people who are sensitive enough to hear my voice, strong enough to accept impossible truths, and brave enough to risk everything to help others. The case file for Officer David Park lists his status as missing, presumed dead. But I'm not dead. I exist in a state that transcends normal definitions of life and death, consciousness without physical form, awareness without substance. I'm still on patrol, still responding to calls, still trying to serve and protect even though I can no longer carry a badge or drive a patrol car. The beat has expanded beyond normal geography to include the spaces between realities, the dimensions where impossible things happen, and where people need help that can only come from those who understand what it means to exist in multiple states of being simultaneously. If you're a police officer reading this, if you encounter cases that don't make sense according to normal investigative procedures, if you receive strange phone calls from numbers that shouldn't exist, pay attention. Listen carefully. We're still out here, still trying to help, still working to bridge the gap between the world you know and the realities that exist just beyond the edges of normal perception. The phone is always ringing in the space between realities. Sometimes the caller is someone who needs help, and sometimes it's someone trying to provide it. You just have to be willing to answer